Chapter 26, Devouring Everything. We are now heading to the Black Pearls auction house. It holds the greatest influence when it comes to auctioning items of extreme quality, no matter what they may be. Their items are exclusive to people of power and those who have enough money to bid on the items they sell. They hold an auction every 3 months, and what they sell is the result of purchases they make externally in other continents. Do you think it's reliable to sell my products there? Gilgamesh raised his gaze and asked. There were very few people who could accurately evaluate his most valuable items, but even within his vault in Babylon, he had tons of the purest quality gold, exotic armors, magical and non-magical crystals, weapons, potions, and anything else that a human could imagine. My lord, if they cannot evaluate your items correctly, you have every right to refuse to sell to them. Moreover, they would be delighted to do business with someone like you. Gilgamesh fell into silence. He seemed to be contemplating the idea of selling an item from his possessions, as evidently, all the items he possessed were of great value and importance. If he decided to sell a powerful item, it could generate chaos, so he had to make a wise choice before arriving at that place. Gold might not be of much importance in this world, he wasn't sure if diamonds held any value either, but what he was sure of was that the weapons and magical objects in his possession could offer him enough money for the beginnings of his plan. Before arriving, he had selected some lower quality items and chosen some precious gemstones that he was sure nobles would like to flaunt as a symbol of their wealth when buying a precious jewel. Besides that, if gold didn't hold high value, he would sell some magical stones and low-level potions he had in his possession. He wasn't certain if there were potions in this world, but since he needed money, he wanted to improvise, and there was no better way to do it than this. Simon didn't know what Gilgamesh had in his possession to sell, but considering his new behavior, it wouldn't be something small. When they got out of the carriage, the gazes of everyone had already fallen on the carriage's markings, and it was known in advance that it belonged to one of the princes. To come to a place like this with such class, only nobles or royalty would make such an entrance. Gilgamesh took a few steps forward, and immediately an older man had appeared at the door and bowed slightly in a show of respect. Prince Gilgamesh, welcome to the Black Pearls auction house. What brings you here? I've come to buy some things and do business. Gilgamesh walked into the building without caring about etiquette, and immediately, transparent glass display cases appeared before his eyes, showcasing a variety of weapons and gleaming armors. There were very few people around, demonstrating the exclusivity of this place in selecting its clientele. As was well known, this place mainly benefited from the auction and sale of high-quality items that mostly nobles purchased. Prince Gilgamesh, I am Raphaeli, the manager of this auction house. I recently heard that you had become one of the youngest sword kings in the history of our kingdom and possibly the world, so it is an honor to have you in this place. Raphael's eyes sparkled at the sight of someone as reserved as Prince Gilgamesh deciding to visit his shop, so he did his best to please him and find out what he wanted. Before we move to a more private area, is there anything in our presentations that interests you? These are the newest items, so I'm sure something will catch your eye. Raphael's shrewd eyes observed Gilgamesh and noticed his interest in an innovative set of clothing displayed in a separate showcase from the weapons area, so he performed his professional duties as best as he could. Other than that set of clothing, there is nothing in this place that catches my attention, so let's proceed to the negotiations. Gilgamesh shook his head and pointed to the clothing set, which perfectly combined comfort and elegance. Click. Then it shall be yours. Raphaeli snapped his fingers, and a pair of young women began to remove the clothing from the showcase while he led the young prince to a secluded room. As Gilgamesh and Raphaeli climbed the stairs of the building, other people and workers who had heard rumors of the cruel prince felt a chill just from being in his presence. Even if others had no direct relationship with him, they felt the need to bow and greet. So, Prince Gilgamesh has finally deigned to leave his mansion. He's still so young, I doubt he's truly a sword king. Another onlooker commented after seeing Gilgamesh. Still, he's frightening. Being in the presence of this prince is truly intimidating. The Black Pearls auction house contained anything one might be looking for as long as one had enough wealth. However, in both the past and the present, not everyone was privileged enough to access all the privileges this place could offer. Gilgamesh looked coldly at all the people surrounding him on his way to the private room where he would discuss the things he needed with this man named Raphaeli, who was the manager of this place. Simon, right by his side, was deeply concerned that things might spiral out of control. Others might not know, but it was clear to him that Gilgamesh was an executioner who could kill with such ease that it didn't even make him flinch. Even the Prime Minister and highly formidable guards had died at his hands without receiving a single scratch. A young woman with good intentions said, "Prince Gilgamesh, what would you like to drink? If you have a fine wine that can impress me, I'll accept it with gratitude. If not, simply a lemonade or something refreshing." Gilgamesh replied to the woman who was attending to him. Then, "Prince Gilgamesh, what matters would you like to discuss now that we are in a more private setting?" Raffaele asked without rushing, finding the exact moment to pose this question. He had been in the presence of the most influential people in this kingdom, and none of them had given him the sense of oppression that Gilgamesh did. As a merchant, he traveled frequently, so he had a lot of experience in getting to know people and could sense what they were thinking with just a few sentences exchanged. However, the Prince Gilgamesh, about whom everyone knew so little, gave him an entirely new sensation. Most nobles came to this place for magical accessories, high-quality swords, and, in rare cases, armor. Therefore, he had some anticipation of what the Prince Gilgamesh might want before he spoke with him, but now there was nothing but mystery in his words. Prince Gilgamesh. Raffaele saw the bottle of wine being brought by one of the servants of this place and personally opened the bottle, took a crystal glass, and poured a glass for Gilgamesh. "Do you think you can auction off some magical items in the upcoming auction to be held here?" Gilgamesh swirled the wine glass in his hand and looked at Raffaele, whose expression momentarily went blank. "You're planning to auction something?" Gilgamesh nodded and said, "Before I show you the items I want to auction, I'd like to know the commission for any items you wish to auction. If the deal is fair, I'll require a lot of what you have in your store, and we could potentially establish a good relationship in the future." Raffaele was no fool, he knew exactly about business and what Gilgamesh meant. He must be looking for more than just selling, he might also be interested in buying. In normal situations, the auction house takes a 30% commission on the value of the auctioned item, but for prestigious members, the auction house only takes 15% of the final bid value in an auction. In this situation, it wouldn't hurt to suggest that they could take 15% of the profits from the items prestigious members might auction. However, he was dealing with the Prince Gilgamesh, so Raffaele adjusted his collar and said, "If it's for the Prince Gilgamesh, as long as the deal is intriguing, we could come to an agreement of 90% for you and 10% for the auction house, which is us. You're no fool, but my deal is much larger, so I'll be keeping 95% of the profits." Gilgamesh, who was sipping the medium-quality wine they offered, smiled and proposed his terms. Chapter 27, Partners or Enemies. This proposal to Raffaele was non-negotiable. Firstly, he was already being very generous by offering Gilgamesh a 90/10 split of the profits. It would be foolish to lower that 10% to 5%, it wouldn't be smart at all. Gilgamesh flashed a smile that made everyone in the room uncomfortable, took a sip from his glass, and said, "The Black Pearls auction house only holds influence in this realm from what I've heard, so my deal will be very favorable for you if you listen to everything I want. But because what I'm about to tell you might result in something very significant, I must be alone as I don't trust all people." Raffaele broke into a cold sweat and said in a serious tone, "Everyone, leave this room. No one is to enter without permission." Alone in the room, Gilgamesh nodded, and then he began to speak. "Raffaele, recently, someone has been tormenting my otherwise peaceful and perfect life repeatedly. In that regard, I tend to get very angry when someone comes to me and dares to be arrogant. So far, there is only one person who has lived to boast about it, and it's because he told me who his lord was." Seeing the nervous expression of the manager of this auction house, Gilgamesh pointed his finger towards the sky and said, "You must know that compared to my incompetent and flawed brothers, I am the most suitable to be a king, but this realm is too small for me. I'd rather live life peacefully and without worries, but for that, I must have my own influence, so I need money. If you are willing to give me 95% of the profits, I can ensure that most of the money generated will be spent on products that the Black Pearls auction house can provide. I'm very impressed by your negotiating skills, you're convincing me, but I still don't know what you need so urgently. If I can know that, we would have a better understanding." What Raffaele had said now made sense. Within this negotiation, nobody, not even Simon, knew what Gilgamesh wanted, so they were still skeptical about this deal. "Slaves. Every slave that enters this realm must belong to my collection, no matter which foolish noble stands in my way." Gilgamesh extended his hand and said, "What no noble, my brothers, or even the king himself has seen is that the people are the power. As long as they see you as their king, no one else matters in a kingdom." Gilgamesh squeezed the glass in his hand so tightly that it shattered into 1,000 pieces. But he didn't care about it. He looked at Raffaele and said, if the Black Pearls auction house is willing to follow only me, we can come to a mutually beneficial agreement and prosper. Slaves. Hearing how calmly Gilgamesh said it sent a chill down his spine, and Raffaele knew then that the worst of princes, no, the most dangerous one, had always been Prince Gilgamesh. Those eyes, that arrogance, the hidden strength within his petite frame, and the schemes he weaves in the shadows are something no one could ever imagine. If anyone continues to underestimate the Prince Gilgamesh, he would end up devouring them all. Don't panic, all those slaves aren't for conquest or pleasures. I'm not that boring. What I want to do is create a business that moves in the direction I choose without the need to depend on anyone else to survive. After saying that, Gilgamesh propped his feet up on the sofa and said, the Black Pearls auction house will be my affiliate, my sole affiliate to which we will sell our items. If they become our primary clients, I believe in the future, you'll be grateful you accepted my terms. Like a lion ready to devour Raffaele, he himself felt he couldn't accept such a significant deal and needed to consult with the owner of the Black Pearls auction houses. This offer is very tempting, and I would like to accept it right now. However, I don't have that authority, so you would need to have the conversation with the owner of this place. Nevertheless, this time we will accept to auction anything you desire with a 95/5 split. I will sell you all the slaves you can buy with the generated money, and we will discuss afterward where you want them sent. Having obtained what he wanted, Gilgamesh rose from his seat and extended his hand to the side, where seconds later a golden ripple appeared. This ripple surprised those present, and from that golden circle that seemed like a portal, he pulled out a very beautiful ring. This ring has a very simple function, improving vision without the need for magic since its function is automatic. Once placed on the user's finger, they can intuitively adjust their sight distance. The first item Gilgamesh pulled out of his Gate of Babylon was a simple one. The next item is a rainbow diamond. This rainbow diamond, aside from being beautiful, enhances the concentration of those nearby, and if used for magical purposes, it could create a powerful object in the hands of wise individuals who understand what they have in front of them. This is... Raffaele froze upon seeing the second item that Gilgamesh pulled out from an unknown space. This item was a magical rainbow diamond, an extraordinary jewel that glows with all the colors of the rainbow as light passes through its facets. Each angle reveals a spectrum of bright and shifting colors, creating a magical effect. For any noble, this beautiful rainbow diamond should be in their possession, and the amount they were willing to bid would reach terrifying sums that had never been seen before in an auction house. The following items were not simple, but Gilgamesh made sure not to touch any of his true relics. What he was willing to sell were the riches of many men he had killed. In total, there were 10 items, from which they expected to obtain a substantial amount of money. After reaching a deeper negotiation agreement with the Black Pearls auction house, Gilgamesh and Simon left the building. Do you know how to prepare exquisite dishes? Gilgamesh asked the silent Simon who was by his side. Simon, lost in his thoughts, didn't understand the question Gilgamesh was referring to. When a predator offers more food to the weaker ones, those beneath him, he's only feeding them so that they become his food later. Gilgamesh looked at the Black Pearls auction house and smiled, as sooner or later, all these auction houses would be his. In just a few days, he had devised a sophisticated enough plan to obtain money easily and with little scrutiny, have one of the noble families backing his moves, and thus have a peaceful place to train his slaves. The useless ones will serve for simpler tasks while they lead their normal, free lives. The more useful ones will enjoy a better life. However, the traitors will die, thought Gilgamesh as he gazed out of the carriage window on their way back home. Simon by his side didn't need instructions, he already knew he had to keep a hidden eye on the Black Pearls auction house. From the beginning, this place had been his choice because in the previous years, this house had fallen into disrepair, and many branches that were once thriving had closed down. This was why, by having control over everything, Gilgamesh could amass incredible power in a very short time, and then he could travel wherever he pleased without many worries about what he was seeking. Without holding the throne, he was naturally the king of kings. Chapter 28, The Lone Warrior. Boom! At that moment, the carriage carrying Gilgamesh came to an abrupt halt, causing everyone to shake slightly. What's happening? Simon looked outside and asked with authority. Captain, there's an old man requesting to speak with Prince Gilgamesh. One of the knights in Gilgamesh's escort announced what was happening outside. Could this be a trap? Simon murmured quietly with concern. But at that moment, Gilgamesh's voice was heard faintly, it's not a trap, go see what the old man wants. Simon nodded and quickly leaped out of the carriage. After a few minutes, an old man in tattered clothes approached, and upon seeing Gilgamesh, he greeted him immediately, "Prince Gilgamesh, I finally have the honor of meeting you." Gilgamesh was momentarily taken aback by the sudden introduction but quickly regained his composure after observing the man. The man before him appeared to be in his 50s or 60s. He wore clothes that concealed his entire body, had a thin face with no facial hair, but his eyes were very lively. Although he was old, his posture was upright, and his energy was high. "I never thought I'd be lucky enough to encounter you." The old man respectfully bowed slightly when he saw Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh couldn't find the right words to converse with this old man. He had always remained calm while playing with life's leisure, but he was puzzled by the current event. If this old man was addressing him so respectfully, there must be a reason behind it, and Simon stood nearby, gripping the hilt of his sword, ready to act if needed. Finding nothing out of the ordinary, Gilgamesh smiled and said, "Old man, you must have a purpose for approaching me in such an open manner." The old man looked around and then directed his gaze back to Gilgamesh. "Do you really want to know my intentions?" "I'm intrigued," Gilgamesh responded sincerely. If this old man didn't have such a lively spirit in his face, he might have thought this was an encounter where the old man sought some financial assistance. "Throughout my life, I've seen many people with a divine aura about their bodies, but their souls are tainted with absolute evil. In contrast, you genuinely care about life, something that others do not. Elder, please speak clearly so that I can decipher what you truly desire. Your words are only confusing me further. First, we're speaking in the middle of the road where people's gazes can be a problem, and second, I don't understand what you are seeking by coming to me." Gilgamesh was at a loss for the first time, finding no malicious intent in a person. What he saw behind the old man's gaze represented only a longing for strength. However, under Gilgamesh's impatient gaze, the old man only smiled. "My sword told me I should follow you if I wanted to become stronger in this life. You see, my strength plateaued with my age, and now it only declines. But when I saw you fighting, my sword told me that you could fulfill my wish and make me a god of the sword." The old man maintained a humble smile on his lips. Simon looked at Gilgamesh to see what decision he would make with this old man, but he knew that whatever it was, it wouldn't change the fact that this old man was someone special. "What will you do in this situation?" "When it comes to brilliance, I am not comparable to you, Prince Gilgamesh." The old man's words left Simon speechless, unable to say anything more. He used to think that Gilgamesh was certainly brilliant, powerful, and wise, but he never imagined that someone could be much more perceptive than him. It seemed that Simon had found a rival who wanted to follow Gilgamesh without any grandiose desires. Gilgamesh only smiled and genuinely didn't care about these comments. One could easily see that this old man was a shrewd and interested person. Someone who had lived for so many years wouldn't call someone 10 years his lord in their first meeting. Such people, if not driven by hidden motives, were individuals who could read circumstances, knowing what to do in each situation. Of course, no matter what kind of person he was or still was, he couldn't escape Gilgamesh's scrutiny. He had seen many people, and when it came to reading thoughts and interpreting the characters he encountered, very few could hide their intentions and thoughts in front of him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be an emperor of humanity. After a brief exchange of words, Gilgamesh allowed the old man to join them in the carriage, and that's when they all headed to the mansion. On the way, the old man, wearing a smile on his face, said, "My name is Alastor, simply Alastor without a last name. I come from a humble family, as my parents were farmers. I married a beautiful woman and had a son." Gilgamesh raised his right hand and said, "Let's save your background story for later. You mentioned a while ago that your sword told you I could make you a god of the sword. What did you mean by that?" "Simply put, when I saw you effortlessly fighting that sword king, I knew you had the resources to turn me into a god of the sword without any problem. You see, my only desire before I die is to reach that rank, and the rest is of no importance to me. So if you can grant me that power, I promise I will be your emotionless sword until my soul can depart from this world on a battlefield." Alastor's words surprised Simon, who immediately regarded this old man as an arrogant elder who didn't know his place. It was impossible for Gilgamesh to promote him to a god of the sword, as that was not solely based on granting power but also on age. However, this wasn't a significant issue for Gilgamesh. He had a goal where many human lives might need to be eliminated if they dared to stand in his way. If the old man in front of him couldn't interpret those desires, then it wouldn't be useful to grant him such power. We will assess you when we arrive at our destination. If you have the power and the necessary will to become one of my swords, then I will accept you under my command, Gilgamesh said with a mysterious smile. After another half hour, they reached the mansion, and everyone headed to an open training field where a battle platform was set up. On one side, some knights were training, all of whom had recently sworn loyalty to Simon and were now of utmost trust. In total, under Gilgamesh's faction, there were about 50 knights, with Simon being the captain of the Prince Gilgamesh's guard. During the nighttime attack, several guards had gone missing from their posts, so they had been sentenced to death for high treason. No one had thought that the Prince Gilgamesh would survive to issue these treason orders, so as a decree, Simon made sure they all died without their heads attached to their bodies. In less than a week, Gilgamesh had accomplished what his sister Ariel probably couldn't have achieved in several years. It was a pity that the vultures circling around her were so inept, as otherwise, things might have been different. Hail, Prince Gilgamesh! Hail, Prince Gilgamesh! Hail, Prince Gilgamesh! A series of greetings were directed towards Gilgamesh, and the tone was more than respectful. Everyone believed that by the side of the Prince Gilgamesh, they could reach heights they could never have achieved by following anyone else. Gather everyone, we're going to hold a swearing-in ceremony, and each of you will receive something very special as a reward. Gilgamesh's eyes gleamed with a crimson hue as he walked toward the center of the training field. Yes, Your Highness. It seemed the time had come, everyone wasted no time and started forming ranks, while other mansion guards arrived one after another and lined up. At the end, Simon stood in front of them and placed his hand over his heart. Sir, we're all here. Gilgamesh was impressed, he hadn't thought that among the royal knights, there would be such skilled soldiers, many with a keen eye. Upon closer inspection, it seemed that they all came from humble backgrounds, which to some extent explained their selection. Step aside, Simon, you'll be the last, Gilgamesh said as he looked at all the men in front of him with a smile. Yes, my lord. Simon, with a hardened expression, nodded and walked behind Gilgamesh. All right, let's begin. Chapter 29, The Will of a Good Man. I, Hugo Darroway, in the presence of the heavens, solemnly swear my unwavering loyalty to the noble Prince Gilgamesh Azura. I promise to protect his interests with honor and courage, to defend his kingdom against any threat, and to follow his guidance in times of peace and war. My sword and my heart are at his service, ready to act in his name whenever necessary. I pledge to uphold the code of knights with devotion, displaying virtue, courage, and justice in all my actions. The first to step forward was a young man of about 24 years old. He appeared young, but his words were sincere, and his loyalty was more than enough for Gilgamesh. A good name, indeed. So listen carefully. Today, in this humble place, I dub you a knight of my guard. Your oath resonates with my pride, and I accept your allegiance. From this day forth, you are a guardian of my decisions and orders. Gilgamesh then conjured a golden ripple that illuminated the knight's face. With closed eyes and calm, Hugo saw the hilt of a sword, and his soul stirred. As my absolute sword, I entrust you with this invaluable blade, unparalleled in the world. This weapon is not just a tool of power but a reflection of your purpose and a promise you have made. Both this sword and any that will be bestowed today will have the power to bend to their owner if they ever betray their oath. May this truth be a constant reminder of your duty and the steadfastness of your commitment. With this sword in your hand, you will embark on a glorious path, face challenges, and spill blood in the course of our destiny. Gilgamesh then walked toward the next knight after bestowing that sword infused with accursed master-servant contract magic, which not only utilized a contract but also granted potential abilities to the sword's user that would become more evident later. These abilities were something like blessings, but they applied only to the sword, not the man who didn't hold that sword. Moreover, if these guards were somehow sent by the enemy, the sword would act as one of their assailants and pierce through the bearer's chest. Although it sounded really harsh, Gilgamesh judged that everything these men would receive in return would be worth it for pledging with their lives. So, as long as none had dangerous thoughts and actions, they would be fine. After some time, all the knights except for Simon and Alastor had a new sword at their sides. And the ones they had been carrying entered Gilgamesh's Babylonian gate one by one without exception. Gilgamesh directed a gaze at Simon, who stood by his side, and said, "You have one final task. Before receiving your sword, you must engage in a sword duel with Alastor, and after evaluating him, we will decide what to do with him. The confrontation will be with wooden swords, on equal terms, and the battle will end when one of you is disarmed or receives an attack that would be lethal in a real sword fight, Gilgamesh said, having high expectations for Alastor. That old man had a strong spirit despite his age. Both contenders picked up a wooden sword, locked eyes, and waited for the moment to make the first move. "I won't disappoint my lord, so I won't hold back," said Simon as he raised his sword and prepared himself. Contrary to what everyone expected, Alastor raised his sword and, in the blink of an eye, disappeared from the spot, moving at a terrifying speed. Thud. Simon, who used a different sword technique than the others, prepared himself with composure and countered the attack with an excellent block that gave him momentum to advance. Simon was close to being a sword king, making him an excellent warrior with incredible potential for further improvement. The battlefield resonated with the clash of wood against wood as the two figures faced each other in a deadly duel. Simon, the captain of Gilgamesh's guards, wielded his sword with overwhelming strength. His movements were aggressive and swift, like a powerful whirlwind seeking to annihilate his opponent. Facing him, elderly Alastor held his sword with serene control and unchanging grace. Alastor's movements were smooth and calculated, as if each step he took had a purpose. He dodged Simon's attacks with astonishing agility, his body gliding like an evasive shadow, barely grazing the edges of the enemy's sword. His gaze was calm but intense, as if he were calculating every move of his opponent. Simon, on the other hand, lunged with relentless fury. His strikes were powerful and brutal, but Alastor seemed to anticipate each one of them. The sound of wood clashing filled the place, and sweat beaded on the foreheads of the two contenders as they faced off in a duel of skill and will. But as seconds passed, Alastor began to give ground. Simon's brute strength seemed to overwhelm him, and his movements grew slower. Simon's blows became more accurate, and his attacks began to land with greater force. Alastor retreated, his face reflecting the internal struggle he was waging. "My grandson cannot see me lose." As he said this, in an instant, Alastor's eyes filled with an unyielding spirit. His movements changed, his body moved like a viper, evading and countering with impressive agility. Simon's attacks started to lose their focus as Alastor advanced with determination. Boom! In a fluid and precise movement, Alastor disarmed Simon. The sword of Gilgamesh's captain of the guards clattered to the ground with a loud noise, and the room fell momentarily silent. Alastor's eyes met Simon's, and in them, an indomitable resolve shone. "It can't be. That old man defeated Simon." It was then that Alastor spat blood, his expression turning pale, and he said, "Do not be overwhelmed by this small defeat. If we had real swords, I would have lost. But today, I couldn't afford to give up this victory. My grandson is watching me." "His grandson?" Simon asked, confused, not understanding what Alastor meant. Gilgamesh, on the side, then understood. What moved elderly Alastor was not his own will, but the will of someone younger, like the loss of a loved one. The old Alastor's talent was unmatched, but judging by the condition of his body, it was easy to identify that he began training at an advanced age, as if something pushed him toward sword mastery. So, Gilgamesh knew that Alastor's will was not his own but that of a loved one who was no longer in this world. Elderly Alastor had not been defeated. He had found an inner strength, an impenetrable focus that had led him to overcome the disadvantage. Those present in the room watched in astonishment as the battle tilted in favor of Alastor. "For whom do you fight?" Gilgamesh asked as he looked directly at Alastor. "I fight for my grandson," Alastor said as he knelt on the ground. "If I give you the key to the power you seek, you will live at most 15 more years. Are you willing to fight for me during those years?" Gilgamesh's question was special, as it was directed toward a purpose that was nothing more than killing and fighting in his name. Understanding this, Alastor smiled and said, "You are an old fool, but since your spirit and will are so peculiar, I, Alastor, am willing to become your silent sword and do nothing else. You are a foolish old man, but since your spirit and will are so peculiar, drink this magical potion. It will enhance your abilities, adjust your lifespan, and rejuvenate your talent, but you will still die. Your body won't rejuvenate, nor will your muscles, only your talent will be amplified, and it will enhance all your power." Gilgamesh's words were clear to everyone. Considering Alastor's age, he would live at most another 40 years. But with that potion, he would live no more than 15 years. Anyone who heard this would refuse to live so briefly just to regain the talent of their youth, gain a bit more strength, and die only knowing the sword. No one understood this sentiment better than Gilgamesh himself, as he was willing to do anything to obtain immortality, searching the world for that power that only the gods could possess. Alastor was no different. his desire to become stronger was something he wanted to achieve for a loved one lost to death. In that respect, he and Alastor were not so different. Drink the potion and take this sword, remember that if you betray me, you will die by the very sword you hold in your hands. Gilgamesh watched as Alastor drank the potion, clutched his chest, and fell unconscious to the ground. Take him to an unoccupied bedroom, he will awaken when the effects of the potion integrate with his body. Yes, sir. Several guards stepped forward and lifted Alastor from the ground. Is it a good idea to give him that power? Simon asked with a calmer expression. It doesn't matter, he will be a good guardian in my ranks as long as he fulfills his desire. Gilgamesh shook his head and said, now it's time to give you a sword, Simon, do not disappoint me. Simon's expression turned serious, and he said, even if I die, I will not disappoint you, my lord. Chapter 30, Oath of Loyalty. What you hold in your hands is a noble phantasm that will grant you incredible power beyond most people in this world. As you will be my right hand, you must possess power befitting of this world. Who are you? Simon gazed at the weapon that had never before touched this earth and felt truly blessed. Simon, who was still taken aback by this incredibly powerful weapon, stammered, it still amazes me, even after having seen much of what you can achieve. I take pride in dedicating my life to your purpose in this world. Although it was a replica, the weapon Gilgamesh had given to Simon was a valuable cursed sword with the effect of cancelling the effects of spells for a short period of 3 seconds and replicating magic every 6 seconds, culminating in a unique attack that could split a mountain in two. This weapon also possessed the authority of the Gate of Babylon. Once the user died, it would return to its original place. Furthermore, to protect itself, it was enchanted so that if there were any thoughts of betrayal, the weapon would automatically kill the user. Gilgamesh, upon hearing these words from Simon, smiled. Then, he looked into the distance where the knights were training with their new swords and said, I am just an extraordinary man. Do not call me God or anything related, for I am not. Both you and I are just men in this world. Are you sure about giving me this weapon? Simon asked, still unsure if Gilgamesh was some kind of reincarnated hero. If you keep insisting, I'll take that weapon back to my treasury. It's a gift, for your past and future services in my name. With this, you won't be bound to me, maybe I'll go live on a mountain in another 20 years. You can live your life, find a woman, and have some children. We only need to deal with a very troublesome being, perhaps in the future. Those words left Simon with a palpable sense of unease, knowing that Gilgamesh was something akin to a god, but he no longer dwelled on it. He saw Gilgamesh as someone capable of achieving anything. Being considered his right hand, he felt a growing pride in his body and was glad he had made the right choice. Mom, Dad, your son will become someone extraordinary beyond this realm. Someone who will stand by the brightest man in this world, and I will bring glory to our family name. Simon clutched the necklace around his neck and went to train with the guards. Inside Gilgamesh's mansion. How long will you keep hiding? Gilgamesh's voice resonated in the spacious place, empty of people, and from the depths of the darkness emerged a petite figure, the woman who had attempted to assassinate him. It seems you've made a decision. However, if you wish to stay by my side, we'll make an oath of protection and service. Gilgamesh snapped his fingers, and 2 golden daggers emerged from his ripples. He then walked toward the assassin and said, from now on, you shall be called Anna. You will work for me, and in return, I will take care of every girl you bring to my mansion. Of course, we won't go around kidnapping people. What I mean is, I'll create an orphanage. There, they will have food, protection, and receive education, all thanks to my great generosity. Gilgamesh's words seemed devoid of emotion, as if what he was doing was a matter of honor for others. What he wanted to establish now was a field of protection. He aimed to gain the favor of the needy, caring for the people whom the nobles had forgotten to protect. Although this city was one of the largest and wealthiest in the world, it had its impoverished sides like any kingdom ruled by simians. But no one did anything because in this realm, slaves were the most precious asset, and on that point, Gilgamesh did not disagree. Every living being has a purpose in life, and now, the future slaves would find a purpose on their path to do things for him. From Gilgamesh's perspective, this was a win-win situation, so this time, he was not doing it all for his own benefit. Believe it or not, I am changing, so I want to be different from the other filthy nobles in this realm who have tortured and hurt you. It seems there's still some love left in your heart, so you will follow me from now on. Gilgamesh watched Anna hold the daggers and show no expression on her face. After all, she had a broken soul. But after a few seconds, she said, I will follow. I just want food and not to kill anyone other than nobles. It's a deal. Gilgamesh looked Anna up and down and pointed out, by the way, wear more clothing on your body, they'll think I'm a damn pervert. Winter is approaching, and you'll be cold if you continue like this. Oh, okay. Anna nodded as she looked at the golden daggers in her hands. After walking a few minutes, Gilgamesh frowned and turned to Anna. I said follow me, but not in a literal sense. You can do whatever you want in the mansion. Read books, learn some etiquette from the maids, or delve into history, as long as what you want can be provided, there won't be any issue. Anna watched as Gilgamesh walked away, her still confused eyes scanning the grand hall of the mansion, and she said, I can't read. In the individual rooms of the knights, located in a separate building from the main one, Alastor lay in a clean bed, every part of his body twitching. Stay with me, my dear grandson. Don't worry, your grandfather will become a sword god in your name. Gilgamesh had seen that Alastor had lived a life full of challenges and losses, but his determination to keep improving despite his old age defined him. From his youth, he had never had a burning desire for the sword and only wished to live off farming. Such a humble lifestyle had taken him through life's ups and downs. His story began in a small village, where he grew up amidst the tranquility of the countryside and the warmth of his family. He married a beautiful wife, and together they built a life full of love and happiness. But tragedy struck when his wife fell from a cliff, leaving a void in his heart that he could never completely fill. Despite his pain, Alastor found the strength to carry on for his son, who was his reason for living. Raising his son alone was a challenge, but he did it for the sake of his wife's memory and the love he held. His son grew up and got married, and Alastor finally experienced the joy of becoming a grandfather when his grandson was born. However, fate had cruel plans. A fateful robbery took the life of his son and daughter-in-law, leaving Alastor with the responsibility of raising his grandson, who became the last spark of light in his life. Alastor cared for him diligently, instilling in him values of strength, honor, and perseverance. From an early age, the grandson expressed his desire to become the world's greatest swordsman, a dream that Alastor supported with all his heart. Years passed, and the grandson grew, training under his grandfather's guidance. The two shared endless hours of practice, forging a strong and unique bond. Alastor saw in his grandson the potential for a bright and promising future and believed in him with unwavering fervor. However, life is sometimes unfair. Illness took Alastor's grandson, robbing him of the dream he so dearly wished to fulfill. On his deathbed, the young man said that even if he couldn't fulfill his own dream, Alastor would do it for him. That child only sought for his grandfather to keep on living, as if he weren't with him, his grandfather would die shortly after he did. Those words became a sacred oath, and Alastor pledged to honor his grandson's memory by becoming the sword god he couldn't be himself. With unwavering determination, Alastor began his rigorous training. Despite his advanced age, his sturdy body and unbreakable willpower led him through unimaginable challenges. Every strike, every sword movement, was an expression of his dedication to his grandson and his firm desire to fulfill his promise. As time passed, Alastor showed everyone that age was not an insurmountable limitation. His skill with the sword grew every day, but he was, after all, an old man who was losing strength with each passing day. When he visited the place where a 10-year-old boy was fighting against a sword king, his sword told him that this child could make him a sword god. And his sword had not been wrong. Chapter 31, The Purple Horse Family. This is much more interesting than I thought, murmured Gilgamesh from the balcony of his room in the Silver Palace, gazing into the distance with a serene expression on his face. Who would have told him in the beginning that a god would visit him in his dreams, attempt to assassinate him on 2 occasions, and that all of this would be led by the decadent circumstances of the environment in which he found himself? Gilgamesh didn't seek to rule in this realm, his enthusiasm for being the king of a kingdom that didn't deserve him was minimal. At the same time, all he wanted was to live his human life to the fullest, but there was always a trigger that dragged him towards power and eventually greatness. After all, he was a king of kings, anyone who saw him as anything less was simply blind. However, he found it hard to believe that the gods could walk the earth as they pleased, especially since they didn't adhere to any specific religion. Hitagami, the human god, was his main target for coming into this world after trying to control him, so he would make sure to kill him, no matter how long it took. But as he had experience in facing gods, he knew that sooner or later the messengers called apostles, children of gods, envoys, or any other title bestowed upon them in this world would somehow seek to end his life before he could end that of a certain god. Following that rule, Gilgamesh had chosen to create the orders of heroes. Essentially, like Simon and Alastor, they now possessed noble phantasms that he had taken from the messengers of the gods in the war where he was crowned emperor of humanity. At the same time, the knights, who were now 50 in number, had truly impressive swords that would at the very least elevate them to the rank of sword emperor, something that represented a specific level within this world. Having an order of knights, heroes who would fight on behalf of true humanity within this world, the attention he should give to the messengers of the human god would be minimal. The possibility of that god interfering in his life would be minimal, so as long as no one had sworn loyalty to him, the chances of him being an enemy were high. Who would have thought that I would ever give my precious treasures to those who would be my swords and warriors, but it is necessary because if the human god interferes with their thoughts, I would have to be vigilant no matter what. Gilgamesh shook his head, and just as he was about to enter his room, he saw in the distance a convoy of carriages bearing the Purple Horse family's banners. The knights, who had already prepared themselves in beautiful black armor, awaited the arrival of this noble family in the quarters of the Prince Gilgamesh, so they performed a small welcome ceremony. They've arrived earlier than expected, but it's better to address this issue as soon as possible. Gilgamesh said as he walked towards his room and waited for the right moment. What kind of person is Prince Gilgamesh? A man with an anxious expression murmured this question inside one of the carriages in the Purple Horse family's convoy. And why does that matter? He found our little one, that's what reflects a small part of his behavior, said a woman with blonde hair tied in a very reserved hairstyle. If you think so little of Prince Gilgamesh, then he will devour you without even knowing when it happened. An elder, the current head of the Purple Horse family, looked coldly at his useless son. This man named Percival Purple Horse led the Purple Horse family of knights, and after the disappearance of his beloved granddaughter, he remained on the sidelines of the internal struggle among the two factions of the elder princes and the only princess who was in the second position of succession. He was not just any old man, as his power was said to be that of a sword saint, and the quality of warriors descended from his family was increasing as they grew. This alone demonstrated that the future importance of his family held promise. However, Percival had little time left to lead the Purple Horse family, and inevitably, this position would fall to his useless son, Cedric, who couldn't protect his daughter well enough and had her taken from him without immediate knowledge. Such humiliation had cast a somber atmosphere within the family to the point that as long as they knew who had the precious daughter of the Purple Horse family, they would launch a direct attack without regard for the consequences. But such moves would be too arrogant and might not even occur, as they would likely bury his family in obscurity. However, things had taken a very important turn for the family's future since they had recently received a letter from Prince Gilgamesh stating that their daughter was under his care, safe and sound, and they were invited to meet with their relative. This would have been perfect for Percival to know who was responsible for kidnapping his granddaughter, but before that, Prince Gilgamesh had killed the Sword King titled the Bone Crusher when he was just 10 years old in front of thousands of people. Only those who witnessed that fight could describe how horrifying the death of a prestigious Sword King was. Everything was deeply interconnected to the point that Percival had pieced together what had happened. It was said that a few weeks ago, Prince Gilgamesh was kidnapped and then reappeared in a tavern with dozens of corpses, and afterward, this same prince killed a Sword King. Upon learning of this, Percival knew that Prince Gilgamesh had sent a very clear message to all his enemies within the royalty. But after that same day, the mansion of Prince Gilgamesh was attacked, where Princess Ariel was also present. What happened that very night still shook the kingdom, and that was because the Prime Minister had been brutally murdered with more than 100 swords plunged into his body. Percival was no fool, he knew that the one who could have his daughter kidnapped was the Prime Minister of the Azura Kingdom. As the Prime Minister was killed by Gilgamesh, he managed to rescue his granddaughter from that swine's mansion. But here is where a problem arises. Is Gilgamesh, known as the Bloody Prince, so good as to save the slaves of the Prime Minister? It shouldn't be that way, but something must have been happening that Percival was overlooking in his speculation. If, in some way, Prince Gilgamesh saved the slaves from the clutches of the Prime Minister, who mysteriously disappeared from his mansion, that means he learned that his granddaughter belonged to the Purple Horse family. So, what is Prince Gilgamesh seeking by doing this? It's not simple charity, so what the prince might be seeking is the support of noble families who remain on the sidelines of the struggle for the future throne of the Azura Kingdom. Percival had understood this plan to a certain extent, but knowing they were dealing with a powerful candidate for the throne of the Azura Kingdom, if the Purple Horse family supports Prince Gilgamesh, other families might follow suit, and the position for a future king could favor Gilgamesh, The bloody prince. Do you believe in the rumors, father? Cedric looked at his father with a serious expression. Percival smiled, looked at his son, and said, Prince Gilgamesh is a man who doesn't hesitate to kill. At his young age, he's a powerful sword king and possibly a genius in magic as well. If someone like him went unnoticed for more than 10 years, do you think the rumors about Prince Gilgamesh's talent are unfounded? Certainly, all families would bet on him because he's more than perfect to be a king, but at the same time, they would question supporting him because it's too late. Cedric also understood what others would think in response to their family's visit to the quarters of the Prince Gilgamesh. We are in the midst of the war, that Prince Gilgamesh openly invited us to the factional war for the succession of the current King Azura. Percival smiled maniacally because from the beginning, they had no chance of avoiding what the other factions thought of the Purple Horse family. And should we be afraid? Cedric frowned, tightened the sword in his hands, and said, if any of those families interpret ours as weak, they'll be in for a big surprise when they underestimate our strength. Haha, it seems that look of yours has returned to your face. Percival looked at his son and smiled with pride. Now, they only had to see what the behavior of that Prince Gilgamesh would be. Chapter 32, What I Want. Tina was nervous. She never expected this to happen and didn't know how to look at her parents after everything that had happened. Her childhood was shattered, her will to move forward was weak, and all she could think about was repaying her debt to Prince Gilgamesh. However, when she heard that her family had arrived at this mansion, her whole body froze, and she even forgot how to breathe properly. A panic attack filled her chest, and everything seemed to be engulfed in oppressive darkness. What am I doing? Tina murmured, not wanting her family to see her in such a pitiful state. At the same time, in the mansion's hallway leading to the main hall, Simon spoke, go and greet the guests, tell them to be discreet with their words so as not to disrupt Tristana's stability. Simon placed a hand on his chest and nodded. He wasn't so useless as to not understand what Gilgamesh meant, so he nodded, grasping his lord's point. After bringing them in, anyone from the Purple Horse family should ensure that the guards outside see no prying eyes in this place. They can kill anyone causing disorder in my name, no matter who they are. Gilgamesh immediately commanded according to his own conjectures. Simon readily accepted the order and refrained from saying anything irrelevant. If this had been before, Simon might have thought that Gilgamesh was forging his first alliance to seize the throne, like everyone else, and would have valued this encounter. But due to the words Gilgamesh had spoken about this realm, he knew that the prince's interests were quite peculiar. You should appear strong in front of your family, that way, you'll make them feel a bit calmer. Gilgamesh said as he walked over to where Tina was and settled into an individual armchair near a fireplace. I apologize for giving you this image, I simply couldn't contain my emotions. Tina wiped away her tears and sat up in one of the side chairs. In situations like these, which are difficult to handle, you should think about what you want from now on, not what others want from you. I've told you before, if you don't believe that your family is the path for you, then you can serve me. Someone like Gilgamesh had never had emotional problems, so things like pain or guilt were not emotions he felt too frequently. What mattered was having a life, what you could achieve afterward could drastically change what you felt in that moment. Gilgamesh, of course, had a grand plan behind all of this. That very reason would change the normal course of this world and stir the tides of the future. In his previous moves, Gilgamesh had set up a board large enough for everyone to participate, even if they were not directly related to the Azura kingdom. For others, the movements on the board represented their future and the destruction of their entire history. Regardless of what happened, as long as Gilgamesh moved the board, everyone had to adapt to the circumstances if they didn't want to be consumed by the tide's waves. This would be Gilgamesh's grand step, even if he had to resort to desperate situations. If he could secure the loyalty of the Purple Horse family, he would have the board in motion in his hands. According to the records from the central database, they had all experienced years of peace, but the technology of this world remained lamentable. Compared to his realm, this country could be considered poor in values, what people felt for it, and what they were willing to give to protect it. Right this way, please. Simon's voice echoed in the distance, and a few seconds later, 3 unfamiliar individuals with the Purple Horse family emblems marked on their chests hurriedly entered. My child. Parents. I'm sorry. Those were Tristana's only words before being embraced by her 2 parents. Gilgamesh smiled at the scene. He was correct in reaching out to this family as they truly cared for their kin. Without showing any courtesy, he remained silently observing this scene until an elderly man took a few steps towards him and bowed respectfully. Prince Gilgamesh, I am the current head of the Purple Horse family, Percival Purple Horse. On behalf of myself and my family, we are deeply grateful that you were able to keep the youngest of our family safe. Percival said, completely ignoring his family's emotions. As the family head, if he displayed weakness in front of Prince Gilgamesh, he would appear weak in the prince's eyes. When Gilgamesh saw this elder, he nodded in response and examined his appearance. Percival Purple Horse had the appearance of an elderly man, dressed elegantly in his traditional black uniform. His hair was completely white, as was his immaculate beard. He had visible wrinkles on his hollowed face, which gave him a soft appearance, but his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. I didn't expect much from your family, but you have surprised me. Only now can I say that you have my attention. Your attention? What do you mean? Well, I'd classify all the nobility of this kingdom as trash that needs to be cleaned up. Honestly, there's not a single family in this group that's exempt, but I can sense that your family is different, so we can continue this conversation in a more private setting while Tristana's parents catch up. Gilgamesh said. Gilgamesh got up and walked towards an office within the mansion. Percival looked at his granddaughter and, without any expression on his face, followed the Prince Gilgamesh through the hallways. As he watched Gilgamesh's figure, his keen senses could perceive that this young man was indeed as he was described. Arrogance was evident in every one of his movements, so he knew it would be challenging to deal with someone like this. You must be quite intrigued by this situation, aren't you? Gilgamesh entered the office, and Percival closed the door behind him. You're correct. I have many questions that I require answers to. Percival dropped the respectful and cautious demeanor, shifting to a more direct posture. That's better. You may take a seat as I'd like to have a closer conversation. Gilgamesh extended his hand towards a chair and then continued, for some time, many have tried to take my life. After the attempt that came closest, I sent them a message that wasn't heard by killing that Sword King. Percival gave Gilgamesh a meaningful look and said, it's surprising to hear that a child no older than a few years would kill a Sword King. I suppose it's not surprising that they thought it was some kind of fabricated joke. Gilgamesh smiled and said, that makes more sense for your explanation, but not for mine. They knew of my strength, but they wanted to kill me because there would be no second chance after that day. They knew that as time passes, my strength will become invincible across all continents, and let me tell you, they are right. After that day, at night, some assassins visited my mansion, and to my surprise, they were all led by the Prime Minister who supports my eldest brother in inheriting my father's throne. Gilgamesh said as he held a red rose matching the color of his eyes. So, what did you do? Percival asked, feeling a chilling sensation. I killed that swine by impaling him with the swords of his personal guards. If you compare the pigs and that Prime Minister, I can confidently say that Darius Silvaganius shed many more tears. Gilgamesh said with a calm expression, looked at Percival, and asked, do you know how I found out? Did one of the assassins make a deal with you? Percival asked in a doubtful tone. It was possible but highly unlikely, as assassins were trained not to reveal their employer if captured. Exactly. I made a deal, and this assassin asked me to kill everyone except the slaves of that swine. So that's what I did, and in that place, I found your granddaughter. Gilgamesh explained. Percival clenched his fists, and his indifferent expression couldn't contain the murderous intent he sensed in the surroundings. However, Gilgamesh, as if unaffected by this, continued, now you understand me when I say that this kingdom is rotten to its core, so I'm requesting your help. I understand your point, but becoming king with just the support of the Purple Horse family won't secure the throne for you. Percival wouldn't lead his family into a clear defeat against other factions, but Gilgamesh's next words left him speechless. Who said I want to be king? Chapter 33, Production of Knights. What? Something like a king is too small for me. If I were to become a ruler in this world, I would become an emperor. However, I do not desire to be the king of this realm. Gilgamesh looked outside through the window and spoke these words. Percival gritted his teeth and said, then, if you do not desire the throne, why do you require the assistance of the Purple Horse family? I need a shield that draws all the attention from the outside, something that doesn't focus on my movements and allows me to act freely even if I dominate the entire world of commerce. Gilgamesh then turned his gaze towards Percival and said, by pledging your loyalty to me, you won't be offering your neck for others to tighten the noose. I will send Alastor, a current sword emperor, and several sword kings to protect your family. But if they are not enough, I will personally step in to deal with any enemy targeting your family. After the rise of various families, it was common for assassins to be sent to kill their descendants, causing the family's growth to stagnate. That's why, by taking control of Gilgamesh's public moves, many would point their swords towards them to find out who was supporting them. Percival Purplehorse was no longer furious. In fact, he felt numb from what he had just heard. Does Prince Gilgamesh have a sword emperor at his disposal? So, what services do you require besides being the face of your businesses? Percival asked, not daring to question Gilgamesh's strength, as this young prince probably had someone very powerful backing him. The slavery business generates the most money after swords and magic books in this world. For that reason, I will buy all the slaves who arrive in this realm, and I want some of them to be trained by your family. Gilgamesh raised his hand and continued, I understand your confusion, but I won't buy the slaves without an apparent reason. I will need loyal workers who carry in their minds the gratitude of being liberated from their slavery. I need talented warriors and mages who can take care of what is mine. Your Purplehorse family will produce excellent knights, with principles of loyalty and greatness ingrained in their behavior. Besides what they will achieve by being loyal to me, they can stand out from the rest and eventually prevail over other noble families in this realm. Gilgamesh didn't know what decision Percival would make, but since he had revealed so much, they wouldn't leave this realm alive if they chose not to be loyal to him. That's why he was committing the Purplehorse family to his path, ensuring that their secrets would be kept safe. I gave your family an incredible gift. I proposed a business that no other family would deny, so I hope for your cooperation and loyalty, Gilgamesh said with a gentle smile and added, I hope you can make the right decision. I'm not sure what you saw in my family, perhaps it was just a twist of fate that we became connected in this way. But let me make something clear, the Purplehorse family consists of powerful knights with unwavering dignity. If you are willing to protect us, we will be loyal to you, as we are eternally grateful, and because your character is respected by ours. Percival could do nothing but accept, as merely coming to this place meant that other families would be watching them. But when he heard Gilgamesh's proposal, there was no reason to refuse, so the smartest move would be to pledge loyalty to Prince Gilgamesh. Everyone might think that simply showing gratitude would allow them to leave this mansion, but Percival knew it wasn't so, and they would likely be attacked if they didn't give Gilgamesh a concrete answer. That's why he had come to this meeting, as he wanted to judge for himself the Prince Gilgamesh's attitude and make a decision based on that. I'm glad to hear that from you, Mr. Percival. Now, let's discuss the next steps. Firstly, I will send you 300 slaves that you will have to categorize into 3 different sections. The first is warriors, the second mages, and the third various talents. You will need to consider the preferences of these slaves and whether their talent is worth it. You must decide based on whether their talent exceeds your desire. Gilgamesh stood up and continued, but you must remember that no one is indispensable, everyone should know they can be replaced. Therefore, after categorizing these slaves, you will begin their training. At the same time, I will start hiring warriors who are willing to pledge loyalty to me and seek power. They will need to be educated, and I will leave that to your family as well. Forgive my bluntness, but if you are not interested in the throne, is it necessary to have so many guards? Percival asked, not quite understanding this particular point. Of course, they are necessary. I will need someone to kill the pigs and protect my treasures. I plan to take over the auction houses and create a significant business to gain authority and real power within this world. Gilgamesh's response was cold, and Percival understood that even though he didn't desire the throne, he seemed to value the things he possessed greatly. He still didn't know how the Prince Gilgamesh had made all of this work, but it wasn't his job to question and find logic in everything Gilgamesh did. It is rumored that certain gods walk the earth, and others are unknown to most people. For that reason, I need you to swear loyalty to me. In return, I will bestow upon you a special sword that will protect and judge you if you ever betray my hand. Do you have any enemies of that kind? I have no enemies, Mr. Purplehorse. All you need to do is what I tell you, and I can assure you that glory awaits your family. What about what the other noble families will think? Percival asked this question. He only needed to be sure of Gilgamesh's stance on the matter. Those families will disappear just as the Prime Minister did, there's no one who can stop me. So, before we embark on a journey through the world, we must automatically stabilize my plans. For now, I only need your oath and that of your family, Gilgamesh said as a brilliant ripple appeared behind him, and a sword materialized in the air. If you feel more comfortable, it's not necessary for your family to swear loyalty to me. You just need to be careful that outside influences don't sway your family members' decisions. Just know that a certain being can enter your dreams if you don't have an amulet to protect you, like this sword. I will ensure that everyone takes an oath in your honor, so as a show of my valor, I will pledge loyalty to you right now. Percival then took the sword in silence and knelt on one knee as a sign of the highest loyalty he could show to Gilgamesh. That sword will enhance your abilities and serve as an amulet. Gilgamesh said with a satisfied smile. Yes, my lord. From now on, the Purple Horse family serves only the faction of the Prince Gilgamesh. Percival said as he held the sword in his hands and observed the mark that appeared on his fist. Without a doubt, this was a life contract. However, something told him he had made the right decision. Chapter 34, 8 Tower. Not many years had passed since Tristina was kidnapped and treated as a slave, but she needed to go through a long and rigorous process of recovery. For Gilgamesh, this was very irrelevant because if she was strong enough to survive that ordeal, it meant her will to live was strong. Now, with the loyalty of the Purple Horse family, he was about to embark on the next plan he had in mind to further strengthen his forces. Today, he didn't necessarily need an army, but he was merely preparing in case someone attempted to harm his treasures. There was nothing more to it, and the fact that he was using his swords to give the slaves an opportunity to better themselves alongside him was much better than mercy. This world was dark, like any other, and he couldn't change that even if he wished to. But what he could do was protect those who needed it as a leader to follow. Gilgamesh cast a cold, icy glare at all those who watched him from a distance. None of them had the slightest clue about the power concealed within his small frame, but that was all right. To them, he was just a weak prince who had been fortunate, and to some extent, this benefited him. Should I kill them? Alastor, standing beside Gilgamesh, asked as if it were a matter of little importance. Gilgamesh shook his head and said, "We can't go around killing people. Tarnishing my reputation further is not something I desire. Let's bid farewell to our guests, they must prepare as they have some tasks to carry out for me." Gilgamesh said as he descended the stairs. "Yes, my lord." Alastor walked calmly behind Gilgamesh, observing every corner of the hallway. Now, Alastor's strength was slowly increasing, strengthening his muscles, bones, and nerves that had worn out over the years. Main Hall, Gilgamesh's mansion. Gilgamesh sighed as he looked at the girl in front of him. "Tristina, from now on, and until you can prove otherwise, the only person you should worry about is yourself. You haven't rested well these past few days, which is why I contacted your family as soon as possible." Upon hearing the word rest, Tristina shuddered as if she had been caught committing a punishable offense. However, she restrained herself and took a deep breath. "There are no words to describe my gratitude, so I want to make a solemn pledge that I will support you in whatever you require from now on. Perhaps it doesn't seem like it, but my desire is to continue training with the sword to find my inner stability and become someone recognized for my strength." Tristina was resolute in her words, and her parents standing by did not interfere with their daughter's decision. "Then become strong, and when you are powerful enough, come to me." Gilgamesh extended his hand, and with a golden gleam, a beautiful sword appeared in his hand. "Tristina, remember that limitations are in the mind, so take this sword and live life on your terms. That is." The eyes of everyone in the room sparkled as they saw the beautiful sword emit a chilling aura. Undoubtedly, that sword was more than valuable in Gilgamesh's treasury. "I understand how you feel, but my purpose in this life goes no further than following my own path without being bothered by anyone else. I detest the immoral behavior of humans who call themselves nobles, so before traveling the world, I want to form an impenetrable circle among those who want to continue on the path of being human." Listening to Gilgamesh speak with a calm and indifferent tone, a feeling of reverence arose in the hearts of all present, and even Tristana's father, Cedric, stepped forward and said, "I heard the decision my daughter made, and I agree. If you believe that my assistance will be needed on the path you are about to take, I am willing to pledge my loyalty. No one will regret making that decision, so I entrust my people to your care, and I hope that the Purple Horse family creates good knights who truly protect the people and not the nobility's swine." Gilgamesh said as he handed a sword to Cedric, who regarded it with pride. Now, all that remained was to wait. As long as the Purple Horse family could create loyal and worthy servants, there would be nothing to worry about, and Gilgamesh would continue his path in peace. A few days later. Black Palace Auction House. Private Room. This is the latest work done by an architect who meets the requirements you need. It can accommodate 800 people, a huge tower right next to it as you requested, and the available grounds are ready for renovation. Anderson extended a blueprint in front of Gilgamesh, who nodded. This tower would revolutionize all the structures in the city of Ars, and the best part was that it would only be a place where his people could rest, train, and eat without being bothered by others. This tower must be operational by the end of this year without any delays. Ensure they receive good payment and that the materials are of the highest quality, Gilgamesh said as he looked at the construction, nodding in satisfaction. Anderson nodded. He had been working outside his comfort zone because the pay was good. During this time, he had received payment in the form of gold ingots and magical stones destined to be sold in large quantities. He had seen many things in his life, but what the Prince Gilgamesh was doing with the construction in a poor part of the city was beyond words. Not only did he want to establish a magic tower, as he called it, but also several schools and orphanages. Gilgamesh knew that buying all the slaves entering the capital of the Azura Kingdom would cause him significant problems when it came to placing them, so there was no better way than creating special areas to house all these people. He knew this would upset the nobles, but eventually the city would be taken over by his innovative constructions, and he would be able to reform parts of this kingdom according to his interests. In addition to this, by controlling the slaves entering this kingdom, he could not only improve his servants but also forge important ties with tribes, noble families, and villages that would be grateful for having their children return to their respective families. Of course, there were families that sold their children, and such slaves would be sent to the Purple Horse family to be trained in swordsmanship, while those who wanted to study magic would have the magic tower that was about to be built for that purpose. Furthermore, he needed a place that would be protected by his treasures where not just anyone could enter. This way, that so-called human god could not exert his influence within his tower. By the way, Prince Gilgamesh, since many of the resources you've purchased are filling up the warehouses, do you have any special plans beyond all this? Anderson, despite appearing manipulable, was very observant and well informed. Gilgamesh, who heard this, smiled and said, I already told you I don't care about the throne, but if my brother's factions continue to bother me, I wouldn't mind being a king in this world just to teach them a good lesson. I've heard that many families that haven't taken a faction in the throne struggle are interested in contacting you. Even many of the families supporting your brother were interested in you. As you know well, only knight families are of interest to me. Others wouldn't be of any use since the Purple Horse family handles everything, isn't that enough? Gilgamesh tasted a delicious strawberry pastry and said, Isn't this world very vast? It is, so vast that no normal person could explore it all, Anderson said with a nostalgic expression. At that moment, a series of footsteps could be heard from outside the room, and soon a sound came from the door. Who is it? Anderson asked, furrowing his brow. She's waiting for Prince Gilgamesh in his office, said a childish voice. It seems they're looking for you. Remember not to be too assertive with your words, she has a certain hatred for nobles. Anderson advised as he leaned towards Gilgamesh. At last, she has arrived. I wonder what kind of woman owns this auction house. Gilgamesh smiled innocently, but there was a dangerous aura in his eyes. Chapter 35, The Mysterious Owner. As Gilgamesh entered the silent room, the scent of flower petals filled his senses, and the room's decor was filled with books, medicines, and many sheets covered in writing in a language he had not yet studied. I must thank you for such a reception, but this lack of respect is not something I can tolerate. Gilgamesh found no one in the room, not exactly where someone who receives a guest should be. Instead, the feminine silhouette was behind a long curtain made of dark fabric. You are much smaller than I imagined, Prince Gilgamesh. A woman, dressed in white, her delicate face carried a seductive tone but was devoid of emotions. She had an air of arrogance, something that could be easily perceived. For Gilgamesh, who had seen beauties and goddesses, this woman had a normal appearance for which he would not gaze upon like any other man dominated by sexual desire. But what stood out most about this woman were her pointed ears, emerald green eyes, and the jewels that adorned her body. I was too polite with someone like you by showing my real face, I am not known for this appearance, so I am already being very considerate with you. At that moment, the bright eyes of this elf fell upon Gilgamesh. There was no lust or bewilderment like the noble swine of this realm, which surprised her greatly and also garnered her respect. The attractive eyes of this woman were evident. However, Gilgamesh remained standing, calm, comfortable, and with a breath as if there was nothing in front of him important enough to pay attention to. Gilgamesh, my name is Elaine, and I am the owner of this auction house, of which you have been an incredible customer these past few days. Elaine greeted Gilgamesh directly, although her height was not balanced, Elaine was much shorter than usual. Therefore, she was not much taller than Gilgamesh already was. Gilgamesh nodded casually. Despite Elaine's unparalleled beauty, he was not moved by this gesture and, on the contrary, said, "In my first encounter with someone of your kind, you are indeed a very beautiful woman. I was expecting an elderly lady in her twilight years as the owner of this auction house. Should I take that as a compliment? Furthermore, I must add that I deeply detest men." Elaine looked into Gilgamesh's crimson eyes, and certainly, this young man would be very attractive in the near future. "If someone as beautiful as you says so, it's because you hadn't met me, or perhaps, certain magical reasons prevented you," Gilgamesh said as he walked to a chair near the window. Like a pure diamond in Gilgamesh's eyes, this woman in front of him had captured his complete attention due to how intriguing she was. "Tell me, Prince Gilgamesh, what are your intentions in coming to my auction house when there are better ones in this city?" Elaine gazed at this young prince with a cold expression. What she hated most was nobles pretending to be innocent when they were the worst of humanity. Gilgamesh acted as if he didn't notice Elaine's attitude. He comfortably propped his feet up on the chair and looked at her, speaking sincerely, "I want to own an auction house. Your auction houses were the right ones, so I plan to buy them and take control. The fact that I haven't severed your neck means I appreciate the workers here, so you can leave as soon as possible. The Black Pearl auction house will no longer do business with you." Gilgamesh stopped playing around, and his eyes turned cold. "You must think that, because of your great age, you know everything, but I have more years than you think, and you should be grateful to receive a compliment from me." As he finished saying that, several shimmering ripples appeared in the room, and chains like snakes moved toward Elaine and held her tightly. "You!" Elaine wanted to dodge those chains, but before she knew it, her feet had already been firmly bound, and no matter what she did, she couldn't free herself. She, a powerful elf who could defeat sword kings and evade the most powerful spells, had been subdued by golden chains from a 10-year-old boy. She was trembling with anger, and her face was deeply flushed. Elaine had invited him because she wanted to know what kind of prince he was, all because he wanted to make such a significant move with slavery in the city of Ars. "You have pride, I can understand that," Gilgamesh said, not acknowledging her anger as he approached Elaine. "You think there's no man who could deserve your body, but let me tell you, not all are the trash you imagine. Furthermore, I don't want your auction house for any particular reason, I simply don't want to wait for your decision when making purchases, selling something, or auctioning a particular item. Become my right hand, and if you wish, at some point, you could get to know me better." Gilgamesh looked into Elaine's eyes and lightly touched her face, which only displayed a cold expression. "Not in 100 years would I marry a human, and much less someone like you," Elaine replied through gritted teeth. "I can feel the chains within your soul, it must be some kind of curse. As my first gesture of sincerity, I will break that seal." Gilgamesh's eyes gleamed, and his hand drew near Elaine's abdomen. "Don't you dare touch me!" Elaine screamed, but at that moment, she felt a surge of golden energy pierce through her belly and spread throughout her entire body. The divine energy broke through the icy seals within Elaine's body, and she could only grit her teeth in pain. Her curse was to suffer from powerful waves of cold that, if left unchecked, could freeze her entire body. It was for this reason that there was a lot of medicine in her room, and why she traveled across the continent in search of a remedy for this curse. However, at the most unexpected moment, a child immobilized her body and openly touched her. This was something she would not forgive, but when she felt that divine energy leave Gilgamesh's body, the tension in her body and her resistance gradually disappeared. The chains loosened their grip, and Elaine, now powerless, slumped onto Gilgamesh's body. Due to the pain, she clung tightly to whatever she could and ended up embracing a complete stranger. "Accursed meddler!" Elaine muttered before losing consciousness. "The curse on your body must have been placed by a very powerful being, it took more effort than usual to remove it from your body." Gilgamesh carried Elaine to the sofa and looked at her sleeping form. His curiosity about her ears piqued his interest, but as he had resolved to change, he decided not to touch them. "What the hell is happening to me? I should be glad that someone like me is interested in someone like her. Oh, what the hell am I saying?" Gilgamesh shook his head and, after leaving a note on the table, exited the room. Chapter 36, Moments before the auction. Elaine fell into a deep slumber, feeling a warm current enveloping her entire body, and a faint smile appeared on her chiseled face. This was the first time she had felt warmth in her body after being freed from that ice curse. As she recalled her history, it was filled with tragedy and a coldness that her bones painfully reminded her of. I am free now. Elaine's crystalline eyes shed tears as she felt the chains in her heart shatter. Elaine, a 190-year-old elf, had traversed a path filled with suffering and pain. From her youth, she and her people had dreamed of exploring the world, traveling to unknown continents, and living unforgettable adventures. However, their dreams were soon tainted by the cruel reality they discovered. The revelation of the true nature of humans, demons, and other malevolent races changed everything for Elaine. Every day, they faced kidnapping attempts and attacks that turned into an endless nightmare. Trust in humans began to fade, and Elaine and her group decided to isolate themselves, moving north in an attempt to distance themselves from others for a while. In their search, they stumbled upon an ancient temple, a place that seemed full of promises. But they soon realized that the temple had other plans for them. Without warning, they were separated and thrown in unknown directions, like leaves carried by the wind. Elaine found herself trapped inside a crystal for over a century. No one came to rescue her, and her heart filled with bitterness as she remained a prisoner in her crystal confinement. Finally, the crystal shattered, setting her free from her imprisonment. But her freedom came at a high price, a curse that would torment her forever, known as the frozen body of the Moon Maiden. This curse froze her body during the nights without killing her, condemning her to a tormented existence. Could she ever embrace someone at night? Could she ever have a child? The answer was no, for her curse grew worse with each passing year. The symptoms intensified, her body grew colder with each passing day, and frost turned into shards of ice that spread from her body at night. Unable to return to her homeland due to her condition, Elaine took a different path. She turned to commerce and, with effort and perseverance, managed to establish herself as the owner of a respected auction house in the capital of the Kingdom of Azura. The objects she had brought from the mysterious cave became treasures that captivated buyers and collectors. Despite her success in business, Elaine remained obsessed with undoing the curse that haunted her. Over the years, she relentlessly searched for a cure, but could only partially alleviate the symptoms that plagued her. Her icy beauty and frosty aura earned her the nickname Ice Fairy among those around her, but few knew of her tragic history and constant struggle. Elaine continued her life in the capital called Ars, hiding her suffering behind a facade of strength. While her spirit remained resilient, the weight of her curse never left her. She knew the greed of the nobles, knew of their desire to touch beautiful skins, which is why she always wore different faces. But she didn't mind remaining in the shadows, investigating a way to break the magical chains that encircled her chest. When she heard about the Prince Gilgamesh, the child rumored to have been a genius in both magic and the sword in his childhood, she knew that things in the kingdom were about to change. And when she learned that this boy had come to her auction house interested in auctioning truly beautiful and valuable items, her interest grew, and she wanted to know why this boy wanted so many slaves. Elaine had been in front of powerful individuals, prestigious mages, and nobles of the highest standards, but none of them bore that impressive look that Gilgamesh had on his face. She knew he wasn't just a child but something different. When he discovered her curse with a single glance, and those chains held her firmly, she wanted to escape but couldn't. And when that warm energy invaded her body, she felt happiness for the first time and knew those chains were broken. After over 100 years of suffering, a prince named Gilgamesh had freed her from that icy prison. Upon awakening, she felt an emptiness in her chest but also a clear image of the one who had liberated her from her torment. His name was Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh's mansion. Listen carefully, Alastor, Gilgamesh directed a penetrating gaze at his follower and said, you must take care of the young ones for a while, at least in the first few months we must keep a close watch on the situation and how their training progresses. First and foremost, no one should touch my people, let alone seek to humiliate them. They all belong to me, and anyone who wants to trample on others must be educated properly. Also, supervise the talent in magic and compare its value to that of the sword. If those students excel in magic and it surpasses their sword skills, you can send them back to my mansion. Gilgamesh had a plan for the more than 300 slaves he had acquired from various sources. First and foremost, he needed to educate them, and there was nothing better than training in swordsmanship or learning magic. To make something of themselves in life, they needed to demonstrate their worth, only then could they move forward. In life, one must put on the same level what they desire and what they excel at, test those two options, and choose the one in which they shine the most, regardless of whether it is to their liking or not. As slaves, whether sold by their families, kidnapped, or deceived, they were all slaves. There was no middle ground for a slave, so Gilgamesh would give them a chance. It's true that most of them are women and of very good appearance, but he would do his best regardless of their looks and was considerate enough not to let them go for now. In this world, if you don't have money and can't protect your life, there is no happiness, only tragedy follows. Something else he sought was personal growth as a human being, as war had turned him into a very cruel person. I will follow orders to the letter, my lord. Alastor bowed slightly and after discussing a few more things, he withdrew. It's much better than I expected. I hope you can live 20 more years. Gilgamesh looked at Alastor's back and focused his gaze on the books on his desk. As he expected, his useless father had shown no interest in what he was doing or the assassination attempts against him. It's curious but expected since the nobility in this kingdom is as trashy as the demonic beasts. At the same time, Gilgamesh had discovered his interest in women of other species. Those pointed ears of the elves, they weren't the only ones in this world full of different races. This world is exciting, Gilgamesh murmured with an exhilarating smile on his face. Chapter 37, Auction 1. My body keeps growing, which should be normal as I'm about to turn 11. Gilgamesh observed his body in a large, wide mirror. It was normal to have this physique since the blood in his body had awakened, and divine energy had been on the rise. With that in mind, he had now recovered more than half of his maximum abilities, and with this, there was no being in this world that could harm him, or so he hoped, as his knowledge of this place was still quite limited. But he wanted to have fun, to venture into this world and find what would fill his heart. During these last few days, an order of knights had been formed called the Templar Knights, a legion of knights who only followed the voice of man and believed in the strength of their sword. There was no religion that touched the heart of every man or woman who joined this legion, and each member received a sword and had to pledge loyalty to the Supreme Lord of the Knights. This order of knights was being led by the Purple Horse family, so everyone suspected that this legion of knights was being sponsored by Prince Gilgamesh. Consequently, several families went to the Purple Horse family residence to seek their help in establishing contact with Prince Gilgamesh, aiming to support his cause and have his backing in the power struggle. It was amusing, but Gilgamesh accepted their oath on the condition that they all pledged loyalty to him and did not tarnish his name with acts he would not tolerate in the nobility. Some nobles set aside their vile customs and embraced change, but those who refused were mysteriously killed that night. Gilgamesh had spent his time reading history books, learning languages, and educating knights who worked in his mansion. During all this time, no one had interrupted him, not even his father paid attention to his actions in recent weeks. Therefore, Gilgamesh could act as he pleased without anyone getting in his way. My lord, the carriage is ready. Simon's voice echoed from outside, and Gilgamesh, dressed more to his liking, stepped out of his room. Is there anything novel that can pique my interest? Gilgamesh asked as he boarded the elegant golden carriage he had made available for his people. Simon, who was entirely different this time, always looked at Gilgamesh with utmost respect, so he replied, nothing that can pique your interest, but the purchase of slaves has been arranged, and the talent division is in progress for the future roles that will require the attention of trustworthy individuals. Everything in this life has value, doesn't it, Simon? Gilgamesh smiled as he looked at the streets of the city, which seemed a bit livelier than usual. Beside him, Anna, the assassin who had attempted on his life, sat eating mint candies. Her appearance had changed completely, and this time, she seemed less innocent, wearing the simplest clothing someone of her stature could wear. Anita, how's the training of my dear assassins going? Gilgamesh asked, looking at Anna, who was usually silent. It will take years to show results. No one has talent, so they must be strong and train hard. Anna's flat tone was typical, as she seemed to dislike talking to others. It's incredible that I can only converse with you, my lord, Simon said, surprised. He remembered the time Anna scolded him for eating her coffee candies, and that day he realized how terrifying Anna could be despite her tiny stature. Before they arrived at the Black Pearls auction house, Gilgamesh told Simon that he didn't want to engage in tedious conversations with fake nobles, so they wouldn't stop to talk to them. Finally, the carriage stopped outside the main entrance of the auction house, and Simon was the first to step out, revealing his enormous frame alongside that impressive black armor that seemed to weigh hundreds of kilograms but meant nothing to him. It's Prince Gilgamesh. I never thought I'd see him in this place. This is the first time the Prince Gilgamesh has appeared at an event outside the Silver Palace. By God, he'll be quite the handsome man when he grows up. Ignoring all the senseless comments, he finally arrived in front of the Black Pearls auction house's entrance. It was easy to recognize as the largest building among all the facilities in this place. Although this auction house was expanding throughout the kingdom of Azura, at this rate, it could become the first auction house to set foot on other continents without any problems. But all of this was due to the meticulous moves of the owner, who seemed to have chosen good managers for the respective branches. Maybe she had raised them herself, which is not surprising since her life is so long that 90 years could be just her childhood. Although this auction house never interfered in politics, they held great power because of the special items they auctioned. Neither royalty nor nobles dared to touch them, as they had all silently agreed not to lay a hand on the auction items from this house before they were auctioned. Upon entering the auction house, Gilgamesh noticed that there were already many people inside. The entrance hall of the Black Pearls auction house was very large and beautifully decorated with heroic paintings depicting different types of creatures and magical races, some of which had delicate poems printed alongside them. The entrance hall was divided into 3 parts. In the front, there was a massive door leading to the auction room. To the right, there were stands leading to private lounges where individuals from prestigious families could attend the auction. Finally, to the left, there were stands leading to reserved rooms for the staff of the place. "My lord, I will find someone to guide us," said Simon, who was the only companion of Gilgamesh within this place. Gilgamesh nodded and watched as Simon navigated through the crowd toward the counter where the receptionist was stationed. After exchanging words, the receptionist looked at him and immediately rushed to the left of the stairs. A moment later, a sturdy woman dressed in a fitted men's suit descended the stairs on the left side and approached them. "Prince Gilgamesh, welcome to our Black Pearls auction house. My name is Sarah, and I will take care of you until Elaine comes to visit," Sarah said with a respectful smile. "Where is Elaine?" Chapter 38, Auction 2. "She asks for your forgiveness, but she had a meeting with some special guests and said she would be with you before the auction begins." Sarah breathed coldly when she saw Gilgamesh's gaze fixed on her, like a dragon questioning the decisions of its creations. Gilgamesh recognized this woman as a beastkin girl, and the strength concealed in her robust body was admirable. Most likely, she was at the level of a sword king, something not easily achieved. "My apologies for my rudeness, Miss Sarah," Gilgamesh spoke formally, though his expression didn't quite match his words. "As far as I'm informed, this is your first visit to our auction house, and you're possibly one of the participants, correct? Then, please follow me to receive a welcome gift." Sarah was now a bit more composed and simply carried out her duties as respectfully as possible. Gilgamesh was intrigued by this welcome gift. No one had mentioned it before, even though he had been to this place repeatedly. Having nothing else to do before the auction, he simply said, "Very well. Then, please follow me." Sarah extended her hand and walked towards the left side where none of the other customers could enter. Many of those in the vicinity turned their gaze but remained silent. They had heard the rumors, and confronting Prince Gilgamesh, who seemed to have a penchant for killing, would not lead to anything good. Upon entering the room, presumably meant for Elaine alone, Gilgamesh walked to the front and saw numerous seats prepared, with people already waiting for everything to commence. His eyes inspected each of them, and after a while, he returned to a nearby armchair and reclined. Simon, who was in charge of security, sat at the back of the room and closed his eyes to meditate. Seconds later, Sarah approached and said, "The first gift prepared for you is a magical crystal sword. This sword was found by my lady, and she prepared this gift for you. Since it's a complex sword to control and incredibly beautiful, Elena decided not to sell it to strangers." Gilgamesh was surprised by this gift. It's worth noting that there weren't many weapons in this world that mattered to him, but he was impressed by this crystal sword that resembled ice. The texture, coldness, and feel were worthy of belonging in his treasury, so having satisfied his tastes, he condensed a bright ripple and stored the sword. Sarah, who was about to present the next item, was surprised when she saw that golden ripple and how Gilgamesh stored the sword. Without saying a word, she took out the next item and said, "Next is a bottle of honey wine. This bottle has a history of over 100 years and is one of the most exquisite ones you can find in the central continent." "Oh!" Gilgamesh exclaimed when he saw the dark glass bottle placed next to him. He examined its size, and his expectations soared. "It seems Elaine did her research well. I'll accept this gift as well. The next item is the simplest one. With this, you can bid at the auction without the need to speak." Sarah produced a red button and placed it on the table beside Gilgamesh. She then explained, "You just need to press it to raise your bid. The room you are in is called Room 0, so you will be identified by that name. You can go now, don't bother me until my dear Elaine arrives. Tell her that if she doesn't show up before the auction starts, I'll destroy this place, Gilgamesh said in a sarcastic tone with a smile directed at Sarah. Sarah looked at Gilgamesh, and a part of her told her he was lying, but the other part knew that Prince Gilgamesh's capabilities were not inferior to that. Therefore, she nodded and said, "Then, I shall take my leave. If you need anything, you can mention my name, and I will appear." "Thank you for your services," Gilgamesh waved his hand, and after Sarah left, he took a golden cup from the gate of Babylon and poured himself a glass of honey wine. The color of this wine was golden, with subtle sweet aromas that gave Gilgamesh a different impression compared to the wines he was accustomed to. After pouring himself a glass, he took a light sip. The alcohol was smooth, the palate feel was gentle, and it definitely made it into his top 10 favorite wines, but it couldn't surpass the godly wine he had in his reserves. "A pity, I thought it would be better, but it's not bad." Gilgamesh poured himself another glass and said, "Simon, as a man, you should appreciate wine, although strangely, there are people who dislike it. Would you like to try a glass?" "Can I?" Simon was surprised that the Prince Gilgamesh considered it, knowing that the wine he had received was incredibly expensive and never thought he would be offered a taste so soon. "It's not a big deal. If you manage to become a god of the sword, I might consider you worthy of trying my godly wine." Gilgamesh didn't look directly at Simon but left him with these words, which, for someone like Simon, meant a lot. After waiting for a few minutes and enjoying delicious food, Gilgamesh, with his enhanced hearing, heard footsteps approaching in his direction. Simon, in turn, opened his eyes and furrowed his brows, improving his breathing in anticipation of any sign of an enemy attack. However, Sarah's voice came from outside, saying, "The auction house mistress is here. I never expected someone of her age to indulge in such high-quality wine. Now I can truly say I've seen it all." Elaine's cold voice came from the door, and then she entered calmly without looking at Simon, who was standing inside. "May I ask which bastard made me wait so long?" Gilgamesh asked as he glanced at Elaine, who seemed to have a more lively expression than before. Of course, this was because she was no longer under the curse. "I apologize, I was talking to some slavers who were contacted by my people to take all their slaves. Since you want to take control of all the slavery that enters the city of ours, I have to handle these trivial matters." Elaine showed more respect than the last time, but her comments remained provocative as always, something that didn't displease Gilgamesh. Women with character who don't lower themselves to his level were what truly fascinated Gilgamesh, although that wasn't the only detail that typically interested him. Still, Elaine was an incredibly talented woman whom Gilgamesh would benefit from having by his side. "It's a pity that my body is that of a child," Gilgamesh thought with a certain pain within his body, but this was for the best. Being a child allowed him to experience the life he had lost in his previous lives, although certainly, with all the things he had done since arriving here, it didn't reflect that benefit at all. "What did you say?" Elaine seemed confused by what she had just heard but decided not to inquire further, as it could create an unwanted misunderstanding with the person who had saved her future. "It's nothing, but you must be decisive with those damn slavers. If they don't respect the normal price, if they decide to ignore it and sell slaves within seconds, they will be killed in a single night. At the same time, the slaves that were purchased will be taken from the buyers, and the buyers themselves will also be killed. If others were to say such a thing, she would despise them for uttering such words with their mouths." However, Elaine looked at Gilgamesh's incomparably calm expression, and his tone of voice demonstrated confidence as he uttered the most arrogant words in the world. Of course, this was not something to admire but something to fear. This only reinforced Elaine's suspicions that Gilgamesh was not a 10-year-old child but a being who had taken over the body of the Prince Gilgamesh. "So, what is the real reason you're doing this, Gilgamesh?" Elaine looked into his eyes and awaited his response. This time, she didn't want a random answer but a genuine one to determine if it would be worth following someone like him. Chapter 39, Auction 3. "I suppose I'm bored. In the future, I simply want to have a clean place to live in and protect. If this kingdom were to be destroyed, I would seriously question whether to be its savior or simply ignore the threat," Gilgamesh said. Gilgamesh changed his charismatic expression and spoke in a serious tone, "I want to marry and have several children. I still don't know if I'll have multiple wives or not. I'll simply travel the world and, at the end of my journey, build a place where I can live undisturbed and die like a simple human. You could be one of my wives. Perhaps if you prove yourself worthy and don't disappoint me in your future choices." Gilgamesh smiled as he held Elaine's hand, his eyes locking onto hers, and he whispered, "I know what you're thinking, but believe me when I say I've never been married before. I could take everything in this world, kill the remaining gods here, but all of that would be very boring. I just want to die and live as a human, but not before I kill the one being who angered me long ago. Elaine's eyes went blank, she never imagined that Gilgamesh would read all her thoughts and answer her unspoken questions. With those words she had just heard, he confirmed many of the things she had been pondering since Gilgamesh freed her from her curse. Don't worry, I can't read thoughts, but I can read your face. So let me ask you a question that will decide whether I accept you as one of my future aides. Have you ever encountered a god? Gilgamesh asked with an emotionless expression. If she says no, he will still know the answer without her needing to be honest. Truth be told, he had thought about it much more carefully, and Elaine could be an envoy of the human god. All possibilities were open since in his previous life, the gods themselves created someone who, at that time, wasn't his best friend but had the power to match him in battle in every way. Therefore, he was unsure if this god who contacted him possessed those abilities. A god? She looked towards Simon with concern. He won't betray me, he'd die before that. Gilgamesh glanced at Elaine and asked, do you know anything about it? There's a dragon god in this world, but I've never seen it, even though I travel a lot. As for other gods, I've never had any contact with them before. Elaine replied honestly, but then added, however, when I entered that temple where I was held captive, there were many mentions of a higher god. It didn't have a name, and there was no illustration of it, as if no one had ever known it. Gilgamesh raised an eyebrow upon hearing that. Elaine wasn't lying, and secretly, he was pleased because she could potentially be a future wife, one of them if he ever encounters another who piques his interest. Now that's interesting. When I removed the seal on your heart, I discovered that it was made of divine energy that only gods possess. I suppose after breaking that seal, I angered some god of this world, but it doesn't matter. There's nothing that can defeat me, Gilgamesh said. Why do you mention it? Elaine asked with a curious look. She knew that the more knowledge she had, the more danger she would be in, but she didn't care. When I had my awakening, a certain idiotic god invaded my dreams and asked me to kill that dragon god. Of course, I refused, and from that day on, if I ever find anything related to that god named Hitagami with any being in this world, I will kill it with my own hands. Gilgamesh wouldn't let any follower of Hitagami escape, even if it were the king himself behind it all. And can you defeat a god? Elaine asked without much hesitation. Gilgamesh considered it for a moment and said, I don't know how strong that god is, but I am not weaker than him. I could give you my answer when I test the strength of the dragon god, although I have my methods to end the lives of gods. He didn't say this to boast but to acknowledge all of his abilities. He had faced demigods and envoys sent to kill him, confronted creatures created by the gods to punish humanity, and personally eliminated them all. In that war, humans won the battle against the gods, and he, Gilgamesh, was considered the emperor of humanity before he died. If you counted the feats of any other man, none of them, upon their death, would make the whole world weep, all forms of life, including plants. No one on earth or in heaven could match him. It's not that I have a hatred for the gods, but that particular one who stood before me in my dreams must be eliminated. Gilgamesh looked at Elaine and said before the auction began, so, taking advantage of the approach, would you like to marry in the future and be one of my wives? Gilgamesh's question was natural, as if it were something normal for a 10-year-old to propose marriage to an elf with over 100 years of life. If anyone knew about this, it would be considered somewhat peculiar. However, he was neither a child nor a saint to deny that the most natural thing in life is to reproduce and die. Elaine looked into Gilgamesh's eyes, her heart fluttered, and she said with a smile on her beautiful face, for now, I'll settle for being your business partner. If you still think the same in 5 years, then I'll give you an answer. Satisfied with that response, Gilgamesh asked, by the way, what kind of weapons do you use? Elaine was puzzled by this and replied, I've always been better with the use of the bow, but it's a weapon that doesn't stand out much in combat when it comes to facing mages and swordsmen. That's why I learned to use a sword, and after dozens of years, I became a sword queen, although no one knows it. Gilgamesh rubbed his chin and murmured, yes, I believe I have a bow in my treasury. Within seconds, a beautiful golden ripple appeared beside Gilgamesh, and after he reached his hand into that ripple, a gorgeous silver bow materialized in front of him. This is a very powerful weapon, I took it from a hero. I believe it was from a very powerful enemy, but there's no need for you to know that. This weapon is strong, it will draw from your body as much as your magical energy or battle aura, so this will be our contract seal. Do you accept? Gilgamesh smiled, having revealed so many of his secrets, she would be a fool not to accept following him. But since she had already given her response, there was no need for her to refuse. Then I will accept your proposal, Gilgamesh, Elaine said in a calm tone. She extended her hand and touched the beautiful bow that seemed like a weapon created by a deity. Finally, the auctioneer, who had entered and stood in the middle of the platform, announced the start of the auction. Chapter 40, Auction 4. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. First and foremost, I must thank you for your patience, as always. Knowing that the entire place is packed, let the auction begin. A few seconds later, the auctioneer, a middle-aged man, began to explain the rules of this special auction. Raffaele then entered with a square object in his hands, covered with fine leather gloves. This square object was shrouded in a snow-white cloth and was placed on a table right in the center. The following items were presented one after another in front of the audience. There was no starting price, and the highest bidder won the item if no one else spoke after 3 calls. After explaining the basic rules of the auction, Raffaele walked to the center of the platform and handed a wooden box to the auctioneer. The auctioneer opened the wooden box and presented a beautiful golden ring. This ring that you are seeing before you is the main item of the auction. This ring has a very simple function, which is to enhance vision without the need for magic since its function is automatic. Once placed on the user's finger, they can intuitively adjust the distance of their vision. What does that mean? I heard that the main item of this auction was supposed to be a magical staff. Besides that, there was a high-quality suit of armor that competed with that magical staff. Someone in the crowd suddenly interrupted the auctioneer's presentation. Damn barbarian, they should cut out his tongue for speaking out of turn and disrupting the auctioneer, he's wasting my time, Elaine muttered with a cold expression. Gilgamesh, on the other side, merely smiled. Those were his thoughts, but he hadn't voiced them. Knowing that Elaine felt the same way, he just smiled. The auctioneer on the stage frowned, he really didn't like being interrupted while speaking. We don't usually showcase the items being auctioned, but since you can now see the items, you'll be able to view them before the auction starts to obtain them. We implemented this dynamic because there are some truly valuable items today, so we were considerate in showing you all the items being auctioned today. To my left, the next item is a rainbow diamond. This rainbow diamond, aside from being beautiful, enhances the concentration of those nearby, and if used for magical purposes, it could create a powerful item if worked on correctly. When the beautiful rainbow crystal was displayed, all the nobles in the private rooms exclaimed with excitement. After all, it was a powerful magical item that could be used for various purposes, with one of the most important being research. Any young mage would be grateful to have a magical item that helps with learning, so this, along with the ring, would be among the most desired items among all the impressive offerings. Since this crystal could even be used to make a magical staff, everyone in the crowd burst with excitement. Incredible! I must get that item no matter what. I'm sure I'll surpass my limits if I get that magic stone, I must buy it. Please, everyone, remain calm and remember that each item will come in its own time, so stay calm. At that moment, the first item of the auction was presented to everyone, and it was a sword that Gilgamesh had chosen to sell. Although there was nothing extraordinary about it, it could withstand powerful enemy attacks. To Gilgamesh's eyes, this sword wasn't worth much as it didn't have any remarkable features, but for other people, this sword was actually a treasure that only an emperor of the sword could wield. As for the impressive presentation by the auctioneer, Gilgamesh didn't pay much attention to it as he was engaged in conversation with Elaine about the most powerful men and beasts. But as time went on, it was the auctioneer's presentation that made Gilgamesh lose interest in having come here. What surprised him even more was that this seemingly simple sword, which started with a few interested parties, eventually caught the attention of the truly wealthy in this place. Finally, one of the nobles in a private room bought the sword for 40,000 Azura gold coins. That amount was astronomical for commoners who rarely in their life touched an Azura gold coin, let alone 40,000 coins of that level. The second item auctioned was a silver armor with both magical and physical defensive attributes. Gilgamesh, who was selling all these items, was not interested in the slightest in watching this scene, and the armor was eventually sold for 23,000 Azura gold coins. When the third item came up for auction, it was a bracelet that created a defensive shield around the user capable of defending against king-level spells, and the starting price for this item was 1,000 Azura gold coins. 15,000, 18,000, 25,000. The auction had just begun, and the bids came in immediately. Elaine, do magical items usually sell for these kinds of prices? Gilgamesh asked Elaine. Elaine stared at the magical item on the stage and said, items like these magical ones are not typically manufactured frequently, let alone sold in this type of auction. Creating such items usually requires many valuable materials, and it's not always a successful endeavor. Immediately after, Gilgamesh looked toward the next item that he hadn't put up for auction and became interested. That next item is interesting. Is it a fruit box? Is there anything special about it? They are magical fruits, often beneficial for healing wounds and providing mages with increased vitality. Moreover, consuming them accelerates mana recovery, and the best part is that they are delicious, Elaine explained with a slight smile on her lips. At that moment, the price of the previous item reached 45,000 Azura gold coins. The next item is about to be auctioned. Chapter 41, Auction 5. If there's one thing that catches Gilgamesh's attention, that object must be in his possession. In his previous life, there was nothing that had stopped him from pursuing that desire until the very end of his life. However, in this life, he wanted to be a little different and was pleased with the idea of having a fair battle with other competitors. The next item is a box containing 35 magical fruits with a delicious taste, in addition to the abundant mana they hold inside. 5,000 Azura gold coins. 6,000 Azura gold coins. 10,000 Azura gold coins. Gilgamesh's cold eyes focused on those fruits, thinking that they might at least be good for him to try something new in the future. Therefore, he waited for the weaker participants to join the competition before he would participate himself. At that moment, the price had stalled at 17,000 Azura gold coins. One of the participants in one of the private rooms has offered 17,000 Azura gold coins. Does anyone want to offer a higher sum? 17,000 going once. 17,000 going twice. The auctioneer on the stage was about to award this item to the private room that had raised the amount to 17,000 when suddenly, one of the crystals lit up in the special room where only the owner of this auction house could be found. But without any preparation, a cold and deep voice was heard, I'll pay 20,000 for those fruits. Everyone followed the voice and soon looked at the private room to the left, a place where they had never seen any interested participants before, let alone heard a man's voice coming from there. Is the owner of the auction house competing with us? That doesn't make sense, a man's voice was clearly heard. That must be Prince Gilgamesh, I saw him enter that room just now. For those who are curious, I am Gilgamesh. There's no need for further introductions, so I hope no one minds if I take this item. If I don't like it, I'll feed it to the ducks in my fountain. If anyone has any objections, they know where to find me. Gilgamesh's words were arrogant, but no one dared to say anything because they were aware of the fearsome reputation that Prince Gilgamesh was building. No one in this place was foolish enough to go against a young man who killed without hesitation, and moreover, he was the Prince Gilgamesh who had recently gained power in the struggle against the royalty. Sold for 20,000 Azura gold coins. Elaine looked at Gilgamesh with shining eyes, his arrogance and confidence made her feel strange, but there was certainly something about him that she liked. She had never before been in the presence of a man willing to challenge even the gods, never before had she seen a human with such an unparalleled character. If he was a reincarnated individual, Gilgamesh in his previous life must have been a very powerful man who shook the world. But since she learned about the possibility of Prince Gilgamesh being one of his reincarnations after he died, he should have left some mark in this past. Still, after searching for a long time, she found no one like Gilgamesh in historical records. As part of her time spent searching for a cure for her illness, she had consulted many history books and records of past wars just to find out if anyone else had her rare condition. Therefore, she eventually discovered beings like descendants of the immortal demon clan. The immortal demon empress, who is also the demon emperor of resurrection, made it seem natural for some beings to come back to life. But her curiosity increased after finding nothing similar to Gilgamesh, no records of his battles or legends. These discoveries left Elaine with only one answer: Gilgamesh was not from this world, or everything he represented in the past had been mysteriously erased. In the Great Human-Demon War, Kishirika Kishirisu, the immortal demon empress who led the magical race, fought and was easily crushed and captured for 300 years. After being reborn, she proudly proclaimed her identity, but many didn't believe her or didn't care. She often went hungry and was more of a beggar than an empress. How did Elaine know this? Being trapped in that ice crystal for more than 100 years, she gained an ability called historical record and star reading. She could read and learn things, but it cost her a lot of her life force, and doing so would ignite the ice within her body. But now, Elaine could do it freely and knew many things that others couldn't. However, there was nothing that told her about Gilgamesh, as if the power she had acquired wasn't enough to read in the stars about the mysterious Gilgamesh's past or future. "What are you thinking about so much, my dear elf?" Gilgamesh asked without looking into her eyes. His hands touched the golden cup, and he said, "If you're intrigued by who I am, only those who are loyal and useful will know, of course, that also applies to my wives. So, how many women do you plan to marry?" Elaine smiled and asked Gilgamesh this naturally. The question was so casual that even someone like Gilgamesh, who was beside her, responded naturally, "My limit might be 3, maybe 1 or 2. I speak of numbers, but there may not be many women who can match my stature. After all, I don't look at the body but at what's behind it, and that's the soul." Of course, Gilgamesh would never admit that Elaine was a very beautiful woman with a pleasant character, perhaps due to his age and experiences. Nevertheless, as he once wanted to experience what many other humans had done at some point in their lives, he would have to look for a girlfriend when he began to travel. "How capricious I'm being, I'll leave that to the future," Gilgamesh said as he watched the items being auctioned one after another. "Of course, it's never good to jump ahead of the facts," Elaine replied with a subtle smile. She had never considered marriage in her life due to her condition. However, now things were different, and it might be a goal to pursue after all this. After another 20 minutes, many more items were announced, including parts of beasts, blood, magical objects, and many other rare things. The next item is the rainbow diamond I mentioned before, so because everyone recognizes the magical qualities of this item, you can start bidding for this valuable item. The auctioneer announced with an excited voice. 30,000 Azura gold coins. 40,000 Azura gold coins. 50,000 Azura gold coins. In no time, everyone was stunned by the steep increments for the item in front of them. To be honest, no one believed it was an item worth so much. After all, it was simply a good-looking crystal. However, for connoisseurs, that rainbow diamond was a valuable item that could be used to create a powerful magical staff with unimaginable qualities. If a magical staff were to be crafted from that object, perhaps a mage could even cast emperor-class magic. That's really interesting. I didn't think that crystal would be of interest to these people. If I hadn't considered it, there would have been a fight right here if I had brought out one with superior qualities. Gilgamesh chuckled at the profits he was making right now, as it was very easy for him to make money. In addition to that, all those tons of gold he had in his treasury had incredible value in this world. Of course, this was because gold had never ceased to be used. Nobles are like that, they spend their money to demonstrate their status in the nobility. This way, they make it clear to everyone that they are much more influential. Elaine said this while thinking about how she became the owner of this place. During that time, she was able to save the few slaves who would be of help to her. She couldn't save them all since she didn't have the power and the dedication to raise them all. That's why everyone at the Black Pearl auction house are children she once bought and taught everything so they could take care of her place when she wasn't here. 70,000 Azura gold coins. 85,000 Azura gold coins. Congratulations, it looks like this item is about to reach 100,000 coins. An enviable figure, Elaine said after seeing how Gilgamesh had obtained a fortune just by selling items he considered useless. Chapter 42, Auction 6. The auction was coming to an end, but in the darkness, there were certain figures moving through the light rain that had started falling like tears. This kind of atmosphere was perfect for many to take refuge in their homes, for others to stop walking the streets, and for some to close their businesses. In the darkness of the alleyways, several figures dressed in dark clothing moved swiftly. They all carried long, slender swords, while others wielded strange weapons that exuded a fleeting aura of danger. From the shadows, one of the figures spoke urgently, "Boss, Prince Gilgamesh is still inside the auction house. What do we do now? Should we wait for him to leave, or?" A masked man standing on a rooftop saw his men arriving. His eyes gleamed with a golden light as he said, "Perfect. We mustn't miss this opportunity to finish him off and take revenge on behalf of our master. Let this kingdom shake to its foundations with much greater force once the Prince Gilgamesh is dead." Understood. Participating in this auction, where he himself sold most of the items, wasn't exactly interesting for Gilgamesh because there wasn't much to entertain him. All this time, he simply watched as he made money and talked with Elaine about some plans he had in mind for the future, just to have some influence outside the walls of his family. Whether he wanted to or not, he would be involved in the struggle of the nobility when the time came for this kingdom to lose its ruler. That's why, according to Elaine, it would be good to expand influence in noble families and gain the support of houses that could represent the power of his faction in the future. Among the families not involved in the power struggle were the Black Crow family, Harrington, and the Ivanov family. These families were noble knights who followed the code of honor, and their loyalty was among the best remaining in the Azura kingdom, aside from the major families that controlled the most important regions of the kingdom. The families Elaine mentioned were those that chose not to get involved in politics, those who remained true to their roles as guardians of their respective territories and were the ones who commanded entire armies directly under the king's orders. If you're interested, you can strip Prince Halfhouse of his power. There are rumors that he has no desire to become king, even though he has the greatest power due to the support of the Eurus and Zephyrus families. If you decide to take what he has, you could have the support of two very wealthy regions. The families that support my brothers don't concern me, not to mention my sister, who is a lost puppy in her fantasies. Gilgamesh rubbed his chin and continued, if I want, I can create new families and make all those who have ruled for decades disappear. The only thing these families should understand is not to bother me, but considering the state of affairs, I'm asking for something impossible. Besides, the Eurus and Zephyrus families might support my brother only in hopes of controlling him if he becomes king. Oh. That's natural. Every family hopes to get better opportunities once the king they supported becomes the winner of the royal struggle. Considering that very few know their true capabilities, do you think those inepts will realize before making another move against him? Nobles usually don't use their brains when it comes to their ego, I learned that a long time ago. Elaine had a clear impression of each of the families in all the regions of the Azura kingdom. After all, she had had opportunities to expand her auction house into regions controlled by those families. So, considering Gilgamesh's position, it was clear that he needed to establish a powerful position to deter all the assassination attempts. The more she thought about who might be attacking Gilgamesh, the more pensive she became. Truth be told, these secret power struggles were normal, and even the king had to be cautious not to favor any of his sons. Assuming he didn't have a favorite among them all. However, the current king was somewhat sluggish in any public activity he undertook. That doesn't matter, all you need is power to be a king. Although I've said that I don't care, the more they annoy me, the more I want to take it by force. But obviously, that's a great hassle, so before something I don't want happens, I'll travel the world and return when I'm 15. When Gilgamesh said this, Elaine thought about what he had said and felt a bit nervous. She didn't think like any other woman due to her age, but if she had one requirement for marriage, it was that the man who asked for her hand be the strongest, not in terms of physical strength, but in character, and in that regard, someone like Gilgamesh had no rival. The last item has been auctioned for 120,000 Azura gold coins. When the last item was sold, Gilgamesh stood up and said, "So, my dear Elaine, I entrust you with all my wealth and the construction of my magical tower. I trust in your abilities, and I know you will make good use of our resources. Some of my knights will visit you regularly to address some issues that require large-scale cleanup, so when you give me reports, I also want the names of those who stand in my way." Gilgamesh walked toward the exit door and added, "Remember, Elaine, you now represent my image, so no one should even think about harming you, not a single hair. Otherwise, their heads and the heads of their families will roll on the ground." Elaine stood up and said confidently, "Then I won't hesitate to give you all their names. I won't accompany you to the door due to my appearance, so I hope you understand." Gilgamesh knew that Elaine had concealed her body since she arrived in the Azura kingdom, so he perfectly understood her concerns and didn't take offense. He left the auction house alongside Simon. "Should I get you an umbrella?" Simon asked after seeing the light rain in the sky. "It's not necessary. Today seems to be a beautiful rainy day." Gilgamesh looked at Simon and added, "Make sure to take good care of Elaine. She might become my wife in the future." "Don't worry, my lord. I will ensure that nothing harms her, even if I have to offer my head," Simon said in an exaggerated tone. Gilgamesh, upon hearing this, walked onto the street without minding the mud or getting wet in the rain. He muttered to himself, "Even if one seeks beauty in life, everything returns to nature when one dies. I too died that time and was buried by my people in Uruk. Maybe my body rotted like everyone else's. In the end, all that remains over the years in humans is a pile of bones, dust that turns into nothing but dust. I should stop blaming myself for still having certain characteristics from my past life. I need to be more careful not to push myself too hard here." Gilgamesh finally shook his head and headed toward his carriage. It was at that moment that several dangerous auras were sensed by him, and an ironic smile appeared on his face. In the end, everyone wishes to be killed by him in one way or another. What a nuisance! Now he had to see the color of blood again. Well, at least those assassins seeking to end his life had come to be killed. Gilgamesh could feel that killing intent from hundreds of meters away, growing heavier by the moment. How could he not understand that this was a gift for him? Simon, go outside, there are crows flying in the sky. These words caused Simon's eyes to momentarily flash fiercely, but then he calmed down and closed the carriage door. This time, he would fulfill his role as Prince Gilgamesh's royal guard, no matter how many he had to kill. He couldn't disappoint Gilgamesh this time, as he himself had said that he could become a sword god in this life. How can I make all these idiots understand that they're only coming to their deaths? If I knew a concrete way, I'd do it, because it's a hassle always seeing useless people die for just a few gold coins. Do they want to kill me? I just want to live a peaceful life. Take the emptiest road, unless you want blood to stain other people's property. Following Gilgamesh's voice, the guards with dangerous looks gleaming behind their concealed faces responded to the order and slowly walked their horses, their bodies getting soaked by the rain. Wait a moment, I want to go with you. A tiny voice was heard among the people coming out of the auction house. But at that moment, a cold voice sounded in the distance, and a tall young man looked at the carriage where Gilgamesh was seated, saying, "Be careful on the road, Prince Gilgamesh." Chapter 43, A Rainy Day 1. Have you ever gifted yourself in such a way? What a foolish young man. When we return home, I want to be informed about that boy's family. They all must be eliminated, even if it means tearing down the foundations of that family. Gilgamesh's eyes gleamed with a crimson hue, but unexpectedly, there was a smile on his lips. He knew that all of this was merely politics, and his older brother's factions were acting on their own to remove him from the future struggle for the throne. Bite the gold ingot and weep for the fatherless bastards. That phrase was what victors in a succession for the throne told the families of the opposing faction that had fought against them. Suddenly, at that moment, everyone realizes that getting involved in an agonizing battle was unnecessary. It's only when death is about to drag you into darkness that you think it wasn't worth it. Regret follows like an eruption, and tears blur the vision. That was what distinguished kings from nobles, commoners from nobles, and animals from humans. He died with a smile on his face, a sword in his right hand, and the conclusion of a noble war that had inspired the entire world. Come, I will cut off their heads and give their bodies to the lions. Gilgamesh declared while raising his right hand with an euphoric smile. It was then that the sky grew increasingly dark, and a lightning bolt shattered the somber silence that had fallen over the surroundings. A massive shadow covered the ground, and the rain intensified. From the darkness of the night, several masked men in black attire, resembling large night ravens, descended from the skies. Even before they touched the ground, numerous blades were directed at the carriage where Gilgamesh was. Buzzing through the air, those blades gleamed in a red hue. Dismal cries could be heard one after another as dozens of men descended from the building's rooftops towards the guards protecting Gilgamesh. Many of the guards, who were already prepared for any kind of surprise attack, shouted upon seeing the enemies, "Protect Prince Gilgamesh!" Each of them unsheathed their swords, which shimmered in a golden hue, while immediately assuming a defensive position around the carriage where Gilgamesh was located. The sound of swords clashing filled the air, creating an unending metallic clash, causing the commoners in the surrounding houses to take refuge deep within their rooms, daring not to come out and observe what was happening. Two more men with a powerful battle aura descended from the roof and headed straight for Simon. Observing the aura emanating from their bodies, they were both sword kings. The previous Simon might not have been able to defeat such powerful foes, but now that he wielded such a powerful weapon, it would be a shame not to confront these two formidable enemies. Have two sword kings mobilized? It seems they are giving a little evaluation to Prince Gilgamesh, Simon said with cold determination as he raised his sword toward these figures in black. To have beings of this caliber in their ranks, the enemies must be led by one of the two factions, either the princess or the first prince. In total, there were 2 sword kings, 7 sword saints, and 20 highly skilled experts below the top rank. For this group of experts to go up against Prince Gilgamesh's entourage, which seemingly lacked powerful guards, this assassination would be as easy as breaking a wine bottle. The 2 sword kings raised their swords, and they gleamed with a menacing battle aura as they advanced head-on. The 2 pairs of eyes behind those masks emitted a thirst for blood and cruelty, while their strikes were intended to take the lives of those before them. Faced with these two attacks, a variety of strategies flashed through Simon's mind. But no matter which one he chose, it would ultimately expose the true power of his relic. His position as a royal guard had been granted with the blessing of the king, and he had sworn to protect the Prince Gilgamesh from harm. With Prince Gilgamesh's strength on the rise, forces being trained, and warriors growing stronger, it meant that they would eventually showcase their strength to the world without restraint. This, in turn, meant that no faction would have foolish ideas regarding Gilgamesh. Only because of this, everyone now believed that Gilgamesh would be the next king of this kingdom with absolute certainty. But if it were discovered that Gilgamesh was preparing himself in such a way that he was creating his own army, suspicions would spread, and that meant the idea of forcibly seizing the throne would lurk in the hearts of many. If Simon revealed his full strength, there was a possibility that everyone would take even stronger actions against Prince Gilgamesh, which would greatly anger him. If this were to happen, Gilgamesh had said he would conduct large-scale purges and seize the throne by force, even if it meant exterminating all of the royalty. The level of slaughter among the higher UPS would be so intense that other kingdoms would look suspiciously at what was happening in the Ashura kingdom. And if that were to happen, noble families outside the capital might unite and launch an attack in the name of a usurper who had eliminated the entire royal family. If this happens, then it will no longer be a matter of noble families, but hundreds of thousands of warriors, and that is something that Simon cannot allow to happen. You will die here. Simon shouted as his sword emitted a powerful force and his speed increased in an instant as he headed forward. Boom! Boom! Two powerful clashes of swords were heard, and it was at that moment that Simon faced two sword kings face to face, creating a formidable battlefield. As Simon faced two sword kings, a figure emerged from one side of him and rushed towards his back with a poison-filled dagger in his hands. But at the same time, Simon's feet slipped and his sword slid behind his armpit, cutting into the chest of the assassin who was attacking him from behind. Err! A brutal wound appeared on the chest of that murderer who had been sent flying towards one of the houses. The killer spat blood while trying to hold his chest, but died seconds later after the bleeding was so much that it made his body feel weak. The two assassins became increasingly nervous as the brutality of Simon's attacks became more and more ferocious, causing them to now take a defensive stance and retreat constantly. The blood from their wounds began to stain their clothes, and it seemed that they were not in a favorable position, but they had to reach the Prince Gilgamesh's carriage and end his life. Everyone thought it would be easy. In their minds, Prince Gilgamesh only had the support of a few families of knights, but unexpectedly they could not advance towards the chariot, and each of the knights who protect him still hold their weapons tightly. Instead, the bodies of the assassins were lying on the ground with brutal sword wounds on their bodies. However, the assassins' attacks were deceptive, and they only needed to cause a small wound to their enemies for them to fall to the ground paralyzed by the poison. In front of the door of the chariot where Gilgamesh was, the knights began to fall one after another. Under these unprepared circumstances, less than a dozen knights had to deal with dozens of enemies who suddenly ambushed them. Strangely, Gilgamesh's chariot had not suffered any damage, and it itself remained silent. If anyone saw this, they wouldn't know if Prince Gilgamesh was alive or dead. Chapter 44, A Rainy Day 2. They shall not pass this point. One of the guards, covered in blood and deep wounds, raised his sword in front of three sword saints and roared furiously as he faced the enemy. The way he fought was brutal, his attacks were comparable to a sword saint ready to ascend to a sword king. But under the overwhelming attacks of three sword saints, this knight couldn't stand out much. Nevertheless, with the knights in front of the carriage falling one after another, there would come a moment when he could no longer withstand these brutal assaults. At that moment, two of the masked men leaped onto the carriage at an astonishing speed, their bodies glowing with a battle aura they hadn't released until now, heading directly toward where Gilgamesh stood. The guards, fighting fiercely despite their failing bodies due to poisoning, shouted when they saw this. Some ran desperately without any caution for their lives, hoping not to disappoint Prince Gilgamesh, who had given them a unique path to greatness. Unfortunately, they were still too weak, and their opponents surpassed them in combat experience to the death. How could a captive lion face one that had defended its territory against powerful enemies? The gap in strength between them became increasingly evident, and the knights were pushed aside, unable to defend the carriage. At the same time, the two masked men reached the carriage. Two swords gleamed with coldness, showing in just a few seconds the death that oozed from their bodies. Gilgamesh's magnificent carriage roof was destroyed, pieces of gold-coated wood flying through the air. Under the dark sky and gloomy rain, this scene was tainted with a tragic sight. At the same time, a golden flash shone as the black swords that had been fired toward the carriage returned like venomous snakes, heading for the hearts of those two assassins who were perched on the carriage. Boom! Boom! With the flash of these swords, the sounds of slicing flesh and a deafening hum echoed around. Neither of the two could stop those projectiles heading for their hearts and were killed without knowing who had killed them. But as their eyes were flattening, they saw a young man with golden hair and red eyes looking at them with no expression on his face, as if their attempt to assassinate him had not disturbed his heart. At the same time, a not-so-tall figure appeared on a distant rooftop from where the battle was taking place. That figure was clad in modern clothes, as if any noble aesthetics in this realm were not to their liking when it came to dressing. "What a bunch of rubbish, they didn't even realize I wasn't in the carriage anymore," murmured Gilgamesh, who had witnessed the deaths of those two assassins he had killed without even being close. However, at that moment, Gilgamesh's eyes caught sight of a small figure running in the distance with a gruesome wound over their left eye. There were two black-clad men huffing as they chased the child running for their life. Pang! In that moment, the child running for their life fell to the ground hard, and mud stained their face. It was obvious that these assassins were pursuing the child because they didn't want any witnesses. At that moment, no matter how talented a person was, a beggar could end your life before you even had a chance to bloom like a beautiful flower. But Gilgamesh had seen the glint in the child's eyes, they showed a desire to live. So, because this had been provoked by his fault, he would save their life. Gilgamesh leaned his body forward slightly, and with a single step, he vanished and reappeared in front of the child. The long swords heading toward the child stopped in mid-air, and long chains emerged from two golden ripples that appeared in the air unnoticed. "Ah! I was just wondering how pigs squeal before they're slaughtered, but their screams are much more pitiful than those poor animals." Gilgamesh's voice reached the ears of the assassins who tried to escape from the chains, but as they exerted their strength, the chains pressed harder on their bodies. Furthermore, as these assassins tried to gather more and more of their strength, the chains would crush their bodies until they were completely shredded. It wasn't for nothing that this was Gilgamesh's most reliable treasure, and he held it in high regard for what it meant to him. "Prince Gilgamesh is here." That sudden cry, accompanied by that statement, confused the assassins who were struggling to approach the carriage. How had Gilgamesh suddenly appeared in the opposite direction to where they were attacking? However, that confusion turned into a sense of urgency, and those not in combat headed in that direction. Right after that cry, a group of figures leaped between the buildings and located Gilgamesh, who was crouched in front of the child. "We've got you." All they required was for their swords to pierce the heart of the Prince Gilgamesh and end this battle that was unnecessarily dragging on. The black-clad men were first-class assassins, all of them were men who worked under a single order, and that was to completely eliminate the Prince Gilgamesh, no matter the cost. The hearts and emotions of these figures in black were as dark as hell itself, everything they did had no emotions. However, their target was the Prince Gilgamesh, so their gazes were different from those aimed at other targets. At that moment, everyone's attention was focused on Gilgamesh, who was simply turning his back to his enemies as if they posed no real threat to him. Therefore, no one noticed that above their heads, several golden ripples had summoned simple metal swords that remained still in the sky with their edges pointed downward. After remaining motionless for a few seconds, these swords emitted a deafening hum and were launched like projectiles toward the figures approaching Gilgamesh with intentions to assassinate him. "Isn't perception important in your line of work?" murmured Gilgamesh as he shook his head. Chapter 45, A Rainy Day 3. A few moments ago. "I have to bring the medicine to my sister, she needs it today, or she'll die," growled the boy who had become entangled in the battle that had erupted. The boy's name was Finian, and he was only 6 years old. His parents had died just 1 month ago due to a serious accident at their workplace, so Finian had to take care of his younger sister, Arya, after that. However, his little sister had fallen ill after their parents' deaths. They didn't have the money to buy the medication, as they only had enough for food, and that wouldn't last more than a week. That's why Finian took on small jobs that merchants asked him to do out of simple sympathy. So, after struggling for several days to buy medication for his little sister, he found himself faced with cruel men trying to assassinate the Prince Gilgamesh. All Finian could think of was to run for shelter, but at that moment, he was spotted by one of the assassins who were keeping watch in the area. They had no heart, so they tried to kill him as soon as they saw him, so after miraculously escaping the first attack, he kept moving forward. "I'm coming, sister." However, due to the rain, mud had formed on the streets, and Finian, feeling his body growing heavier, succumbed to numbness. He didn't know what was happening to him, so he simply took the bag of medicine and held it tightly in his mouth as he crawled through the mud. "Arya, my little sister." The fierce eyes of young Finian slowly lost their sparkle, but his body kept moving forward. At that moment, under the rain that had completely soaked his body, he felt a rush of warmth that instinctively woke him up. That source of warmth was comforting, as if it were a beautiful golden shield. When Finian turned around, he saw a tall figure there, shining in golden light and remaining calm under the attack of the two men dressed in black. However, just when he thought they were about to be killed, the opposite happened. Chains held the enemy in the air. "It's incredibly powerful." "Hey, kid, what are you doing out here, and why are you fighting so hard?" Finian, upon hearing that question, remembered why he needed to be out here and said, "My little sister needs medicine, she's waiting for me, so I have to go help her." As he tried to stand up, Finian's weak legs couldn't bear the weight of his body, and he fell back into the mud. He pushed himself up forcefully and muttered, "My sister needs this medicine." "What's your name?" Gilgamesh asked, his attention on the surroundings. "I'm Finian, and my sister's name is Arya." Finian began to spit out dark-colored blood, indicating that the poison from the sword that had cut his eye had spread through his body. "You foolish child, don't move and quietly drink this medicine." Gilgamesh, not caring if his clothes got dirty in the mud, knelt down and held the head of the boy who was dying from the poison of the sword that had cut his eye. Meanwhile, ignoring the figures dressed in black flying through the sky, he handed the medicine to Finian, and the boy drank it without knowing what liquid he was ingesting. "Die. You all talk a lot in a battle." When Gilgamesh turned and the assassins saw those eyes, they felt like their souls were crushed by a great hammer and they suddenly spat out blood. After that, as if it were not enough, the swords in the sky fell like meteorites on the bodies of the men in black who had jumped in their direction. Boom! 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 The sound of the swords hitting the ground caused the earth to burst into rubble and the bodies of the assassins were split in half. In the rain, the spilled blood was scattered on the ground and pieces of unknown men could be seen all over the place. Gilgamesh stood up and watched this whole mess with a cold expression on his face, then he saw the long-dead assassins in their chains and snapped his fingers. Seconds later, all the swords that had been cleaned by the rain disappeared from the ground including that of his enemies. "Take me to your little sister, boy, if she proves to have an ounce of courage like you then you will be accepted into my care." Gilgamesh's eyes went to Finian who was traumatized by seeing all those corpses on the ground, but after remembering his most important priority he stood up and ran forward. "Don't stop and keep running, I'm right behind you." When Gilgamesh's voice reached Finian's ears. "Yes." Finian shouted between breaths. It was then that Gilgamesh's perception noticed several figures at the end of the street and frowned, "These garbage are multiplying." Seeing the assassins heading in his direction, Gilgamesh looked at them from a distance and condensed a golden sword in his hand. The two assassins who were running towards him stopped as they sensed danger coming from the surroundings. "If you don't come then I will come to you." Gilgamesh thought with an excited smile and the sword in his hands was shot towards the first target that was closest to him. Boom! The blood spread slightly covering the view of the assassin to the side and Gilgamesh who took advantage of that slid at high speed. "Where?" "Right behind you." Gilgamesh muttered and when the assassin's gaze turned back two immature hands held his throat like iron pincers and then blood burst out like a fountain. "You!" The assassin only felt a warm current fall on his chest and in a short time his eyes were invaded by darkness. "At least it's raining, the blood will be drained from my body." Gilgamesh looked into the distance as the boy named Finian continued running and after hearing the sounds of battle he walked away from that place. Chapter 46, A Rainy Day 4. On the other side of the battlefield, Simon, who had taken control of the battle, had ended the lives of numerous masked assassins while simultaneously facing two sword kings. "Die, you damned bastard!" One of the assassins was about to thrust his sword into Simon's body when he erupted in a devastating hidden power. That crimson light gleamed, and the masked men screamed in fear, a look of horror shining in their eyes. They lost all thought of killing Prince Gilgamesh after seeing that they too would be slain. They hurriedly sheathed their swords and retreated at an impressive speed. Their expression after witnessing how easily Simon had dispatched numerous sword saint experts was indescribable. That was a force they simply couldn't overcome. In fact, when they first faced Simon, they believed he was just a sword king among the lower ranks, but his strength continued to increase as the battle progressed, while theirs diminished. However, in the face of an entity with an unknown origin and strength that defied all logic, it was best to consider this mission a failure and retreat if they wanted to survive. But Simon wouldn't let them escape, so with terrifying strength, he increased his speed and caught up to the two assassins, both of whom were sword kings, and cleaved them in half. When the battlefield finally returned to its tranquility, there were only knights standing around the carriage, struggling to catch their breath. They had won, a bittersweet victory, as they had not been able to protect their lord, who had acted on his own, which was unacceptable. But they could do nothing more than grit their teeth in frustration. "Stop the bleeding, prioritize your future healing, and I won't search for the Prince Gilgamesh," Simon said as he waved his sword, the blood on it sliding to one side. "Yes, sir." In a dark alley, where only dogs and cats would dare to venture on a day that seemed stained with absolute agony, several men in black ran to hide from the danger that was lurking. However, the most deplorable thing was that the deep wounds on their bodies left large stains of blood on the ground that couldn't be concealed by the mud and water. "We're all going to die here," said one of the masked men as he clutched his stomach, which had a long gash. Beneath his clothes, you could see his intestines spilling out from his stomach, and blood immediately stained his entire attire. "Hold on, if we hide our presence, we might be able to escape." Arg! No matter where they fled, Gilgamesh found them all and took it upon himself to kill them all. "No one will survive after today." Following these words, Gilgamesh appeared in the alley and began to swing his sword, once, twice. Every swing of his sword took a life as if he were the very reaper of death. No one could escape or resist, all they could do was beg for his forgiveness, which would never be heard. Loneliness, sadness, desolation. All these titles and negative emotions embodied Gilgamesh, making anyone feel sad, perhaps desperate or fearful. Even now, as he killed, he didn't feel happy or satisfied, it was something he did simply to remain as he was before. After having killed them all, Gilgamesh left that dark alley and looked up at the ceaseless rain in the sky. The cold air enveloped his body, and for the first time, he felt the agony that had surrounded him when he saw hundreds of thousands of men dead on the battlefield. This made him very angry, but as a king, he couldn't drown those feelings with anyone else. "After this, I'll travel the world, otherwise, I fear I'll end up the same as in my previous life, and that's not the case for this new identity. After all, I have to change. But now they've made me angry," Gilgamesh said as he sensed Finian had arrived at his home. "Is my mind becoming sensitive?" Gilgamesh no longer enjoyed many of the desires he once did in his past life, so once he embarks on his journey, he will discover new things that excite him. The corpses of the assassins lay in the mud. Those assassins who had seemed invincible until recently were now all dead, their bodies covered in mud and water, now little more than garbage. Finian's house is a very modest one at the bottom of the city of Ars, standing shyly in the most forgotten corner of the town. Its wooden structure is worn by the years and weathered by the elements, the beams eroded by the passage of time and moisture. The clay tile roof, once reddish and vibrant, now shows signs of wear and leaks. Its walls, once painted in vivid colors, have lost their luster and now appear chipped and faded. The front door, made of deteriorated wood, hangs crooked on its worn hinges, barely fulfilling its function of keeping the outside at bay. "Sister, I'm back!" Finian shouted as if what he had just experienced had no effect on him. Gilgamesh looked around the windows, the frames were worn, and the shutters had fallen or were broken, allowing the natural elements to enter freely. Inside the house, the scene is equally desolate. A rickety bed, covered by a tattered and faded blanket, occupies much of the space in one corner. On the bed, a girl under 6 years of age, approximately. "I wonder where her parents are." "Well, that question doesn't make sense now." Gilgamesh entered the small house and approached the younger sister of the boy who had made an impression on him. "Is she your sister, Arya?" Finian opened the bag with medicines and said in a friendly tone, "Yes, she's my younger sister, Arya. It's only for her that I still fight to survive." Arya, a delicate girl with pale skin, slowly opened her eyes and saw her brother's dirty face. "Finian. I told you the best medicine was having you by my side. Look how dirty you are." "This feels strange," Gilgamesh muttered to himself as he moved around the room, contemplating what to do without these children seeing him as a kidnapper looking for servants. The girl had an unusual white hair color, so some strange magic-related illness must have afflicted her. Understanding that it was a magical ailment, he knew there was no medicine that a child could obtain that would help her. "Brother. There's a handsome boy, but he's strange." Arya assessed Gilgamesh and pointed at him with her trembling finger. Finian was surprised and gently pushed his sister's hand away, then squinted his eyes and whispered, "I suspect he's the Prince Gilgamesh, but due to the mud on his body and blood, I'm not sure. Regardless, he saved my life and offered to bring me home. At this moment, Gilgamesh felt a mix of indignation and touched by the sibling scene he was witnessing. Just as he was about to reprimand the child, he suddenly felt that something wasn't quite right in this turn of events. Children, I will make you a suggestion you can't refuse. If I manage to cure your sister, you must repay me by becoming part of my retinue, so that in the future, you can be great assistants. Since you're alone, you're likely to perish in the winter, so it would be wise to accept. He didn't know why, but that innocent child named Finian was very peculiar, and just to be sure, he would take them back with him. Are you telling the truth? Can you save my sister and give her good food so she can grow and not stay small like me? What should we do if we follow you now? Finian became very excited upon hearing this proposal. You foolish child! Do you think I lie? Who the hell taught you something so foolish? Well, it doesn't matter, what you'll do with me in the future will be based on what you learn. Gilgamesh brought his right hand to his chin and pointed, you could become knights, mages, scholars, librarians, or whatever you desire. Despite the fact that this might not benefit him much in the future, he felt compelled to help these children who were alone. The way things were going, they might be sold as slaves someday. So, it was best for them to come with him, that way, he could finally return and rid himself of all the dirt on his body. Chapter 47, Sense of Life. Prince Gilgamesh. Where is he? Simon advanced through the streets with a terrifying aura shrouding his body, but as he made his way through the streets, he discovered that there were more corpses than he could count at a glance. This meant that he had not done his job well and that he was not yet ready to call himself Gilgamesh's right-hand man, not even worthy of protecting him. How could he feel proud to be his right hand? Just as he was about to increase his speed, he heard a calm voice calling him from afar, you look good. I thought you couldn't handle those two ants you were facing. Gilgamesh, holding a girl and followed by a boy, appeared in his sight. My lord, forgive me for not being able to keep your tranquility and making you have to raise a sword. You're growing little by little, Simon. This is not such a big deal. I understand you have your insecurities, but never hold back your sword with any enemy, even if it's a god. If your bones aren't broken and your muscles aren't bleeding, it means you didn't try hard enough, so think about that when you have to defend me. Gilgamesh handed the girl in his arms and said, I can't send them to the Purple Horse family for training. The girl has potential in magic, and the boy in the sword, but they can't be separated until they're at least 10 years old. So, do you plan to keep them by your side? Simon didn't quite understand what Gilgamesh was thinking about it. He wasn't usually very interested in this kind of thing because he liked tranquility, so he didn't quite grasp the goal of bringing these children back. For the time being, yes, but right now all I want is to get out of this dump, Gilgamesh said as he walked through the mud and puddles due to the heavy rain. Simon immediately said in a calm tone, don't worry, my lord. A carriage is on its way, and the knights will take care of the corpses. Do you have any special instructions you'd like to give? None, return with all the wounded directly to the mansion where they will be treated. If anyone asks about my condition, just tell them I am extremely angry due to this fierce act committed against my pardon, said Gilgamesh, who looked into the distance as a simpler carriage arrived at high speed, which was better than expected given the circumstances. When Gilgamesh boarded the carriage, it immediately set off for the mansion, followed by the injured guards and new knights who had arrived to control the situation, count the deaths, and identify the suspects. The attacks on the princes were becoming increasingly fierce and frequent, which could destabilize the people, so security would be increased just to keep the affected individuals calm in this incident. What a damn waste of time. Gilgamesh secretly frowned, but such activities against him were insignificant because the assassins were so weak that he could have killed them without moving a muscle if he wanted to. But it was true that he had been bored lately. Although this was his new life, he was still too young to appreciate all the flavors he could obtain in this life. At first glance, this world looks very weak, but if gods exist, things can change a little later on. Living in this city is making me sick. At least I should endure this until I create my safe haven here. The magical tower, or a tower with the name Uruk, was a simple construction to keep intruders out and create an environment filled with what currently mattered to him. Once he regains the love of the people who benefited from his hand, he will know that the things he once had are returning to this world. But no matter how he looked at it, this place was not his previous world. He understood so little about this world that it both intrigued and wearied him. Nevertheless, he knew he was probably overthinking it because he still felt genuinely confused. Reviving could be an exciting adventure for any other humble man, but Gilgamesh was not just any man. He couldn't be compared to anyone in this world, and his perspective on this could be seen as either a reward or a mockery of his achievements. But he had died honorably and been praised by all. He had defeated the gods and left in men and women a sense of justice that didn't involve any kind of religion. One only needed to believe in the sword and the kingdom, a pure and clean realm where even the poorest had incalculable worth. I doubt really where to direct my path. Of course, the idea of becoming a king is out of the question for now. But with my goal being a certain god, I cannot afford to take over such a weak and fragile kingdom. As he passed by a church, Gilgamesh's mouth twisted with disdain. The Meles religion was the world's largest religious organization, founded by Saint Meles, and it existed on almost every continent where humans lived. The first time Gilgamesh heard of this religion, he immediately associated it with a religion that worshipped Hitagami as a god, but what surprised him was that it wasn't like that at all. Hitagami couldn't be Meles for a very simple reason: Meles had acted in the human world. It happened because she used a massive sword strike to defeat some demon lord. The sacred sword's road was basically a path that followed the damage from that strike. Hitagami couldn't personally appear in the human world, that's what he had been told, and based on his deduction, Gilgamesh suspected that this god wasn't lying. The only way Gilgamesh suspected he could interact in the human world was through his messengers, apostles, or chosen ones to carry out his will. A religion that divided its believers, the psychopaths who cling to their beliefs of expelling demons and exterminating them entirely. And then there are those who see any race as their equal, something quite interesting considering the human-demon war. Before he realized it, Gilgamesh had already arrived at his palace, and after reaching the door, a bottle with a strange liquid appeared in his hand, which he handed to one of the servants. One drop for each of the wounded knights. Once they've been cared for, tell them to reflect on the battle they had this afternoon, Gilgamesh said in a cold tone before taking off his clothes and heading straight for the bath to take a shower. Your words are commands, fourth prince. The servant bowed respectfully and quickly headed to the infirmary where the wounded knights from the battle were. Gilgamesh Azura, currently 10 years old, is the fourth prince of the Azura kingdom. A demon, very powerful, the youngest to receive the title of Sword King, with unknown abilities, perhaps a powerful magician, possessing unimaginable treasures, commanding powerful knights in the Holy Sword Kingdom, and suspected to have one of the elders by his side as a sword emperor. He is an unmatched genius who could become a sword god by the age of 30. From a young age, he was considered the best prince of all due to his talents in both magic and swordsmanship, but his overwhelming talent made him humble himself for 4 years. Being the target of an assassination attempt, it is said that he killed more than 30 assassins in an old tavern and then emerged without a scratch on his body. Everyone suspected that after his mother's death, he secretly trained for the following 4 years, and after being bothered in this way, he showed his teeth a bit. But believing it wasn't enough, the fourth prince visited the main headquarters of the water god style and brutally killed one of the most prominent students who was about to become a sword saint. On that same day, his father wanted to seek revenge regardless of the consequences, but Gilgamesh challenged him to a death duel in the Colosseum of the city of Ars. Thousands of people witnessed their battle. No, it is said that it wasn't a battle but a one-sided beatdown by Gilgamesh and appreciated by all. In that case, the fourth prince should be a powerful sword warrior, and from that day on, many called him the son of the sword. A week ago, another assassination attempt was made against him after the fourth prince left the Black Pearls auction house. It is said that 2 sword kings died, more than 8 sword saints, and around 24 assassination experts. That same night, one of the heirs of a noble family was brutally murdered, and the entire family lost half of their wealth, as well as their most precious relics, including their slaves. It is rumored that all these acts were committed by a sword emperor, but it's only speculation. After that day, the Prince Gilgamesh was not seen again, but it is said that the power of his faction is growing rapidly, and he is winning the love of the people through his deeds in his name. Undoubtedly, Gilgamesh is the most beloved and talked about figure in the entire Azura kingdom. Gilgamesh. Only 10 years old and already someone incredible. I wish to meet him someday. A girl with scarlet hair looked at her wooden sword with excitement and gripped it tightly. She was definitely going to meet that fourth prince someday. Just wait, someday I'll challenge you to a duel, the girl said as she blew out the candle in her room and closed her eyes. Chapter 48, The Tower of Uruk. A few months later. The tower bearing the name Uruk was completed and located in a less populated area of the city of Ars, the capital of the Azura kingdom, where Gilgamesh currently resided. This tall tower, the largest in the kingdom after the Silver Castle, was one of the busiest places due to its excellent combat services. In other words, this beautiful-looking tower housed a battle simulation inside where warriors could test their strength for a considerable sum of money. There were 3 levels, and if the challenger died in the test, they had to leave their sword and all their belongings behind. However, if they managed to pass the test for any reason, they would receive a comprehensive evaluation of their power and could take on special jobs offered by the Tower of Uruk, which had rewards many coveted. But what everyone hoped for someday was to become a member of the Uruk forces because this assured them unimaginable power. It was said that those who became members would soon become sword saints, and as long as one was talented, they could aspire to become sword kings. It was true that once you belonged to Uruk, betrayal was considered a death sentence, and no one had escaped that fate. But not all Uruk members became warriors, some were honest workers, and as long as they were members of the tower, no one could touch them because it would trigger a punishment that nobody wanted to receive. Concerns grew as the days passed because the major trading companies were losing not only authority but also a significant portion of their income in recent days. If this continued, they could lose all the power they had gained within the capital in 1 to 2 years. But what annoyed them the most was that no one knew the owner of Uruk. Many said it was the Purple Horse family, which had recently gained a surge of power and income, causing their business to grow rapidly and unexpectedly within ours. With the factions getting fearful ahead of time, someone will definitely get injured, and that's when we strike. I never thought the king of this kingdom would be so inept, allowing his people to fall into such agony right under his nose. After I had the means to fight back, his moves against me stopped. Looking at the sunset from the top of the Tower of Uruk within ours, Gilgamesh had learned many things as his influence grew rapidly and steadily within the kingdom. Whether it's ruling from a throne or through trade, there are always rules that must be followed no matter what. No power, no matter how strong it is, should forget the people who form a kingdom. Everyone, even those who steal, keeps the world running. For Gilgamesh, a kingdom is ruled by power, considering who governs it. These are standards for men, and they must be respected. If a king is not strong, then he is not a king but an inept sitting on a powerless throne. If a man is strong, he could become the emperor of a vast territory. However, this kingdom, which was considered the strongest among all, was being ruled by a weak and fearful man as Gilgamesh had observed since he arrived here. Although his victories were admirable because he was a king who managed to take advantage of his devastated territory and rule over more than half of the western part of the central continent. Even so, he should have taken it all and become an emperor. And if he didn't do this, it was because he was weak. Even after Gilgamesh had received several assassination attempts, all that king did was send more powerful guards and a letter congratulating him on everything he had achieved so far. It was for this same reason of disinterest that his prime minister had tried to assassinate his son. In fact, he succeeded, and it was at that moment that Gilgamesh took control. But these were just observations, things that seemed curious to him due to some factors he had considered for the future. Listen carefully, Alastor. If I were the king of this kingdom, the first thing I would do is a power purge. After that, I would plan a restructuring of the walls that surround us and certain idiotic laws that govern this place. Once I stabilize the kingdom, what I would do is forcibly take control of the entire central continent and then reform the kingdom. Alastor, who heard Gilgamesh's words, saw in him a golden shadow, a back he could never surpass, and a man who could become the ruler of the entire central continent. The decline in the strength of the people is something that must be equalized with their rulers, slavery must be erased, and the offspring who would be the bulwarks of human strength in the future must be taken into account. During the Human-Demon War, millions of lives were lost, but there was no winning side because the two races live and are even considered by some part of the human religion as equal to humans. That's curious, but Gilgamesh would not interfere in that decision. It seemed that many did not learn from the war, and after a few years, they remained just as careless, undisciplined, and those nobles believing themselves to be the pinnacle of the Asura kingdom when they had done nothing to improve the lives of their people. I believe you could be a turning point for all humans, someone who can merge with the people and understand what's in their hearts, Alastor said with a deep and calm voice. What has been the response of the families to whom you requested my hand? Gilgamesh asked with his hands behind his back, contemplating the sun setting behind the mountains. The Black Crow family accepted your invitation, the Harringtons have not yet responded, and the Ivanov family said they would come. That's already a significant consideration, considering they don't get involved in politics like the others, so this would be your victory. Within his royal guards, Gilgamesh, with the support of his top servants, began aggressively reforming their training after they swore loyalty to him and accepted an unparalleled sword in this world. He started with them, giving them lessons on leadership, group battles, strategies, and the cruelty that must be unleashed against the enemy. After the initial assessments, these royal knights became captains who began training warriors who started following him no matter what the future held, with the sole hope of becoming stronger. To prepare a group of royal knights with potential and a hidden one in the shadows, it could be said that Gilgamesh personally managed the chain of command. Those who would be commanders and captains were decided by him. His intentions were to create a central power group within Ars that worked in Uruk and in their respective businesses that he had been opening over time. He divided his forces into 4 very important parts. The first division was led by Alastor, including non-affiliated royal knights who were captains and instructors. He also valued Alastor's tranquility and his coldness when making decisions that improved everyone's position. The new recruits who were recently accepted were classified by Elaine and trained by her until they were worthy of moving to the central part. She was responsible for identifying those with potential in magic, swordsmanship, finance, trade, intermediaries, or servants. Gilgamesh had his reasons for choosing Elaine. She had a keen eye for managing finances and judging people, so her decisions would be assertive in finding talents who would enhance the status of the Uruk company. As for the true knights who joined his royal guard, they were all led by Simon. This was a group personally selected by Gilgamesh. They were devilishly trained by him, and no one else had the right to order them. Finally, the last part was those who had not yet joined his ranks. They were all being trained to aspire to some of the positions and be trained under some of the high command. They would be in the future the next form of growth of Gilgamesh's power, they would be his wings that would grow in all regions of the Azura kingdom. Everyone had been trained with the special methods created by Gilgamesh, which immediately increased the physical strength of all warriors, and their mastery of the sword took several terrifying leaps. Chapter 49, The Mystery of Power. In front of 500 people standing beside a massive metal drum filled with the blood of unknown beasts and substances that no one recognized, but with much anticipation to enter it. This was the final stage of the training for the newcomers, and what they were about to do was called the strengthening through a blood ritual. The blood within the metal drums would fortify their bones, muscles, cleanse their bodies, enhance their senses, and increase their battle aura to levels they could never have dreamed of achieving before. Rumors had it that if they were lucky and their talent was good, they could become a sword saint or even a king. But there was also the possibility of reaching the realm of a sword emperor, something only known to the members of Uruk. This was a method of Gilgamesh, who had done it once with the blood of divine beasts. Perhaps a dragon would work, but bringing all that blood in perfect condition was very costly, and what was more complicated was that it was time-consuming. Therefore, they chose to buy blood from different beasts, and these requests were accepted by adventurers in rural areas of the Azura kingdom. So today, as they were about to graduate after 1 month of intensive training, they all understood that their training methods were forbidden and unique to the Uruk Tower. Now, they would finally meet their lord, who owned the Uruk Tower and was considered an incredibly powerful being. When the moment arrived, Gilgamesh appeared before them, and they all froze. They had never thought that the 4th prince had been behind all of this, but at the same time, they were glad, for they were following someone considered the sword's son. Many of you know what you have beside you, but for those who still have doubts, I will tell you clearly. Gilgamesh walked in front of these 500 people and said, "This is a blood ritual. It has nothing to do with magic but everything to do with your bodies, as you will undergo a transformation where your body will be enhanced while you observe the vitality of the blood and the precious objects contained in this liquid. Don't forget, the longer you stay within this precious substance, the stronger you will become. If you manage to endure until all the effects are absorbed into your body, you could even become at the very least a being considered a sword king." Everyone listened to Gilgamesh's words with a great smile on their faces. They couldn't wait to immerse their bodies in that immense torment to gain much more power. "As all of you are brave warriors, I will accompany you in this trial, and I hope you don't lose to a child," Gilgamesh said jokingly, causing a burst of laughter. "When you're ready, fully immerse your body in the disgusting blood and accept the power into your bodies," Gilgamesh said as he removed the top part of his clothing and immersed himself in the blood. Since the lids of the metal drums were opened, the threads of medicinal fragrances wafted from the liquid into the surroundings. This fragrance, like alcohol and the smell of blood, was enough to let them know that the component of this liquid was extremely valuable. For this blood ritual, the main method was boiling. The special medicines that Gilgamesh listed were unique in the process. The magical plants that he had only in his treasury were something only he could do with a 100% success rate, so as long as it was his warriors using this method, he didn't mind. There were different systems he had created for the preparation of this blood ritual: blood from powerful beasts, nourishing medicines, magical stones, and the condition for transformation. I'll leave the rest to you, Elaine. I'll begin, Gilgamesh said before entering the metal drum. When everyone entered the drums, the blood began to boil, and this discomfort quickly turned into pain. They felt as if the metal drums were set in waves of flames that fueled the boiling of the liquid in which they were submerged. Finally, after a minute within the liquid, it began to emit a unique fragrance. This fragrance was an odor that didn't smell entirely bad, like unsweetened candy. First, it's the veins, muscles, and body tissues. Then, the organs, and the battle aura undergoes a unique cleansing. Boom! At that moment, a powerful burst was heard in each of the metal drums, and the battle aura surrounded the bodies of those undergoing the transformation. Each one enduring this metamorphosis clenched their teeth tightly, avoiding emitting any screams of pain. The essence of blood was divided into various factors, but everything would become one when the mixture was perfect for the human body. These blood rituals were common in Gilgamesh's armies, that's why they were able to stand up to the chants of the gods back then. Like when crystal is molded, gold is purified from impurities, and wine is delicately prepared, all these factors were similar when refining a warrior's body. All those wounds and punishment inflicted on the muscles would return as if a wolf were biting every part of the bodies of those inside the metal drum. In the end, the liquid began to merge with the bodies of all those receiving this power. Within that liquid, it emitted a powerful aura of all kinds. Elaine, who was on the side, said, the best score was 30 minutes, the least was 28. Everyone is willing to die after knowing that they could become a sword king, but not everyone is willing to endure the pain to attain that power. This method is a shortcut, but they will receive the pain of a blow to their bodies. That looks incredibly painful. Will it also be done with the group of women who are being trained? A girl who was behind Elaine shuddered a bit. It was fortunate that she had been chosen for trade. They won't die, it's good for their bodies, and besides, the strength they can gain is unparalleled among those on the outside. To be honest, I would do it too if I were weak. Elaine was amazed by this group. It seemed that everyone fully accepted the effects of the blood ritual. It seems that many sword kings will be born today to serve Uruk. This is incredible. Chapter 50, The Meeting of the Three Houses. Inside the metal drum, even Gilgamesh's head was submerged in the red liquid. His muscles and pores in his body were very relaxed. This kind of weak blood ritual wouldn't bring him many benefits, but it could put his body in better condition, and to the naked eye, there would be no other body that could match his. At this moment, thunderous sounds echoed within Gilgamesh's body. The blood ritual permeated throughout his entire body, and the essence of strength caused him to relax completely. All his thoughts were momentarily muted, and he felt as if electric currents were running through every part of his body. This was a pleasant sensation. For him, it wouldn't generate pain, more like a massage. If he was doing it now, it was so that those who had this opportunity to enhance their strength would strive to the fullest. But for others, the entire process of this blood ritual would be very painful. They not only had to endure the reconstruction of their bodies but also the crushing of their muscles. Despite the arduous and painful process, everyone cried out due to the intense pain they couldn't bear. No one knew when the ritual had ended, but when the pain subsided, they had all completely absorbed the power and were now entirely new men. They had all increased their overall characteristics, they were much more powerful, and their talents would possibly improve after this. When everyone had recovered, several maids had approached with black blankets for them to clean themselves, and everyone looked at each other in confusion. Congratulations, all of you have absorbed the power that this ritual has given you into your bodies. At this moment, Prince Gilgamesh left because he had an urgent meeting, but I'm sure that no matter what you think, you are a source of pride for him. Elaine stepped forward and looked at everyone with a satisfied expression. Perhaps they didn't know it, but that liquid, though it had no price, was estimated to be worth more than 10 million Azura gold coins. Throughout the morning, Gilgamesh, who had already changed, headed towards the meeting room where the heads of the main families he had summoned awaited his presence. But before that, Gilgamesh addressed Finian and said, "You wield a very heavy sword for your body, so you must increase your muscle mass through special training." Finian nodded without saying a word. He had sworn loyalty to Gilgamesh after he had saved him and his younger sister, Arya, who was now learning magic. His talent for the sword was excellent, so much so that even the instructors who taught him were surprised by his rapid progress. "You should know that I have very high expectations of you, but you must not force your body into something it's not yet accustomed to," Gilgamesh said as he sipped a cup of tea. Finian looked at Gilgamesh as if he were looking at his god. He couldn't erase from his memories the scene of him fighting against those assassins as if he were playing, something he would have never imagined from someone 3 years older than him. Finian didn't understand how Gilgamesh was so strong. What does the Black Crow family plan by showing up in such an extravagant place? Don't tell me you've forgotten what it feels like to be in a city after all those years living with the crows. An extravagant voice broke the silence of a room with 2 elderly men inside. This man wore a beautiful red suit and a red rose on his lips. But look who's here, old Alarion. I thought your Harrington family had ended its story after going to a farm to protect a village that not even flies touch, one of the elderly men sitting in the room responded indifferently. In response to this, Alarion Harrington, the leader of the Harrington family, said firmly, your Ivanov family, living to protect a border that will never be violated, is extremely exhausting. I imagine you've fantasized every night about the start of another war just so your family name can resonate again throughout the central continent. Well, what the hell are you two doing here if you both hate damn politics? Caspian Black Crow, you finally speak. I thought the crows had eaten your tongue. It's always a pleasure to see you again, old Ivanov. The crows are always watching, Caspian Black Crow said as he bowed, thinking, damn bag of bones, if you keep talking, I'll cut your throat and feed it to the crows. I'll turn your body into ground meat to feed the hunting dogs eagerly waiting outside, and I'll use your sword to dig your own grave. With these twisted thoughts, Caspian Black Crow smiled amiably in front of these 2 recognized old men. To people on the outside, they were just 3 heads of their respective knight families, but inside, there was a great story to tell. Long before the 3 of them became the successors of their respective families, they worked together as friends in an adventurer group and were known as the 3 Sword Maniacs. One-eyed Crow, Caspian Black Crow, appeared the kindest on the outside but the darkest on the inside. His life revolved around thin, penetrating swords, which he said were for piercing the hearts of his enemies. The calmest was Alarion Harrington, who had dreamt of living in a peaceful place away from wars and battles with monsters from a young age. It was after he had expelled a group of rebels that the king granted him that privilege while he cared for one of the largest crop villages. Lastly, there was Jax Ivanov, a lover of large-scale wars who ended up retired at the border where not even dogs fought against cats, which was quite regrettable if you asked him. They had all received a letter sent by the 4th prince inviting them to be part of a bright future, something that was about to shake the entire kingdom. But they didn't come for political interests, they came because they wanted to know how a child could become a sword king and find out where the power that protected him came from. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I must thank you for your honorable visit. I see you've already greeted each other, so let's get to the first. Gilgamesh had arrived at the perfect moment, otherwise, these 3 old maniacs would have started fighting with their own fists.